The hunter asked Luo Wei, weren't they brothers who fought side by side until the end? Why did Luo Wei treat him that way? Didn't he remember what happened when it all began? When monsters appeared from spatial rifts everywhere, wreaking havoc. Later, these rifts were called dungeons. Those who ever came into contact with them gained mystical powers, class abilities. So they formed a class squad to conquer these dungeons. They advanced successfully. They even managed to conquer the most dangerous hidden SSS-rank dungeon. Luo Wei said that this was precisely why he had to be eliminated. He had become uncontrollable. Powerful owners of class abilities can easily violate the kingdom's orders. Hunter, you have even reached the SSS rank, the most dangerous enemy of all. The strongest abilities must remain in the hands of the royal family. Only then can the kingdom live in stability. The young man cried out, "Does Luo Wei justify the fact that he slaughtered his entire family and comrades?" Luo Wei said that he had modified his armor a long time ago. The explosion caused dangerous poison to be injected directly into his wounds. After the SSS rank battle, the young man hardly had the strength to resist the poison. Luo Wei said that he, in turn, had gathered an entire army to pay his last respects to the deceased. The young man thought, could these really be brothers for life? Laughter, and nothing more. The hidden skill, Reflected World, meets the activation conditions. This perfect skill reverses everything. The young man closed his eyes and lost consciousness. His body sank deeper and deeper into the water. Decades passed. The bank of a turbulent river. Young people on the riverbank threw a rope over a tree branch and tied him to the end of it, hanging him upside down. One of the bullies said that this scoundrel was pretending to be dead. The villain told the victim that he hated his face. The leader of the bullies ordered his henchmen to lower the boy into the water again. The bound young man said that he was not pretending. He was really very ill. The bullies loosened the rope, and the young man's head ended up in the water. The leader said that this time they should hold him under longer. If he pretended again, they should teach him a lesson. The young man began to suffocate underwater. He couldn't even call for help. Why was this happening? The young man didn't understand why it was always him. He thought he heard a strange sound. Another young man appeared on the riverbank and shouted, demanding that these people stop immediately. After all, this guy could really die. The villain turned around and said that in that case, he could heal himself. He was a bard after all, although that clearly didn't help him much. The villain approached the young man and said he was a hypocrite. After all, he was the one who led them to this victim. So, if anything happened, this death would be on his hands too. The young man was outraged. The villain asked if maybe he wanted to swim too. Could it be that Vitya's toy had developed a mind of its own? The bully swung his arm and was about to hit the frightened young man. However, something incredible happened. The water in the river trembled and began to disappear somewhere. Those present were frightened and shouted that it was an underground passage. But where did it come from? The bullies let go of the rope and started to run away, shouting that a new underground passage had opened up. The young man saw that the victim was still tied up and his head was still in the water. The young man thought that he had no time to think. He had to save the victim. He rushed to help. The young man tried to untie the ropes, but at that moment, monsters began to emerge from the crevice. However, for some reason, the ropes would not budge. The young man turned around in fear. An armed and aggressive monster was already nearby. At the last moment, he managed to loosen the ropes, and the bound man jumped to his feet and resisted the monsters. The young man activated the glacial effect skill and used it against the approaching monsters. The system reported that the man had used basic healing on a minor demon. The application was unsuccessful. The targets had already recovered. His friend asked what this guy was doing. Why was he healing a monster? The young man opened the system window and obtained information about the character. It was Yun Che, who had the Bard class. The guy was extremely surprised. Was he really Yun Che, using a healing spell? The young man felt that this was not his body. Usually, when someone touches the dungeon, they connect to the system and are assigned to a random class that cannot be changed. Then, thanks to the dungeon, they become stronger, acquiring abilities corresponding to their class. However, the young man was a warrior who had reached the peak. Then he used the Reflected World. The Reflected World is a perfect skill that reverses everything. The young man found himself locked in the Reflected World until he heard the cry of the dying boy. The young man realized that he had been reborn in this body. There was little good in that. However, the young man was still grateful to the boy. After all, it was he who gave him a chance for revenge. His friend told Yun Che that the monster was getting bigger. He needed help because he could only handle a maximum of 3 monsters. Yun Che understood that his current body was too weak. Even these pathetic monsters were beyond his capabilities. He couldn't even run as fast as they could. Yun Che currently possessed weak and useless skills. These skills were too niche. They were all based on support. At the same time, other classes surpassed him in everything. No wonder they always looked down on him. Relying on his former combat instincts, he could hold out for a short time. However, he needed to get out of here as quickly as possible. Reflected World. This hidden skill was now his only hope. But how exactly did it work? The young man used this skill on a small demon, but the attempt was unsuccessful. What conditions were necessary? Was his level too low? Did he need a real mirror to use it? At that moment, the monster found itself above its reflection in the water. The Reflected World skill was used on the small demon again. The attempt was unsuccessful. The level was insufficient. Yun Che realized that he didn't need a reflective surface. The whole problem was that his level was too low. However, there was nothing he could do about the level yet. He needed to try using the skill on something else. Yun-che used Reflected World on the rusty cleaver in the monster's hands. The attempt was unsuccessful again. This was repeated several more times. His friend told Yun-che to stop playing around with his useless skill. He could no longer hold off the monsters on his own. A huge monster appeared before the young people. The Vicious Lord, a level 10 monster. It was a demon born from decades of resentment on the battlefield.
The guy holding back the onslaught thought it was the end for them. You need to be at least level 10 to deal with such an elite monster.
The number of monsters emerging from the dungeon was increasing exponentially. Yun-che used the skill, Reflected World, on the pebbles by the roadside. The result was unsuccessful. The level was insufficient. Yun-che thought that this skill didn't even work on a stone. Was the level difference really that big? Monsters were already surrounding them on all sides. Yun-che used Reflected World on Chaoju's barrier. The result was unsuccessful again. The skill could not be applied to other people's abilities. Yun-che thought he seemed to understand everything. He needed to apply this skill to his own abilities. Reflected World was applied to Yun-che's Entangling Vines skill. The young man used chaos spikes in its reflected form. The armed monster swung its cleaver at Chaoji. Yun-che delivered a powerful punch to the monster's jaw. The huge monster flew to the side and was deactivated. Chaoju was unharmed. Yun-che realized that the effect of the skill had become completely opposite. Instead of immobilization, confusion occurred. The vines immobilize one enemy. The spikes hit the target with a low chance of causing confusion. As a result, the enemies begin to attack each other. The confusion effect status causes them to attack random targets. Yun-che thought that the useless skill became truly powerful after applying reflection. What if he tried to reflect everything here? Reflected World truly lived up to its reputation as a hidden SSS-rank skill. It didn't just reflect skills, it was an obvious improvement in all stats. Yun-che thought that if he used the unreflected version of this skill, not only would the success rate be extremely low, but the immobilization would last a maximum of 1 second, failing to realize its full potential. Yun-che wondered what would happen if he reflected all his skills.
Powerful strike. Deceptive Blade.
Each use of the skill increased his attack power. Deceptive Blade was activated. The young man realized that he had only activated it, but now each use would increase the damage. The potential of this ability was impossible to imagine. It seemed as if the monsters had severely damaged each other. When they died, they gave a decent amount of experience. He even managed to level up. It was just what he needed. Leveling up completely restored his mana. Yun-che thought it was time to test the Deceptive Blade. The monsters were still in a state of confusion. The spikes of chaos were activated. Yun-che realized that he had easily achieved a twofold increase in his stats and skills. The young man realized that this skill broke all the rules. Now he was not afraid of any monsters. Yun-che acted calmly and decisively, leaving the monsters no chance of victory. Chaoju couldn't believe his eyes. Was this really Yun-che? How could a 5th level bard do such a thing? Where did he get such moves? Yun-che moved close to the huge monster and cut off its head with a single move. The young man thought that with his current level of power, he would hardly be able to cope with the 11th level elite. He needed to become stronger. A 21st level battle chimera appeared before the young people. It was a demon born from decades of resentment on the battlefield. Yun-che wondered in surprise. Could a 21st level demon really be hiding in this dungeon? He activated a skill suitable for the occasion, but the spikes of chaos did not work against the combat chimera. The target was immune to chaos. Yun-che looked at Chaoju, who was trying to resist the monster by activating his defensive barrier. The young man remembered the old days when his friend, clad in knight's armor, did the same thing. The knight turned around and told the young man that there was no need for him to rush forward. Why did he never listen to him? Yun-che rushed to Chaoju, who was lying on the ground. Had the young man signed his own death warrant? Why did he go up against such a monster? Yun-che used the basic healing skill on Chaoju. The Deceptive Blade was provoked. Yun-che thought that the bard's healing skills were truly pathetic. Were there any healing potions here? There was only one bottle of potion available. Yun-che told Chaoju to drink it. A monster boss of an unreal level appeared from the dungeon. Yun-che thought that he still couldn't handle such a boss. However, those mobs had almost killed each other. If he tried, he might be able to do it. Yun-che told Chaoshi to try to hold on a little longer. Yun-che activated the Deceptive Blade and raised his level. His stats were fully restored. Chaos Spikes activated. Yun-che knew that he needed at least a 400% increase to defeat this boss, but his blade only lasted for a minute. He needed to cast the spikes 40 times in 50 seconds. That meant he had to reach level 10. The monster boss approached closely and, growling loudly, lunged at Yun-che. The Deceptive Blade gave him a 510% increase. Yun-che decided that this was more than enough. He prepared to parry the attack and counterattack. An energy-charged blade appeared in Yun-che's hands. The monster boss was defeated. Chaoju couldn't believe it. Was he really awake? The 5th level bard had just cleared a new dungeon single-handedly and raised his level by 3 points. Chaoju asked the young man if he was really Yun-che. Yun-che told his friend to collect the loot. Chaoju wondered how Yun-che had suddenly become so strong. Yun-che asked his friend what his relationship with Chao Benben was. Chaoju asked in surprise how Yun-che knew his great-grandfather's nickname. Yun-che wondered if he was really standing in front of Chao Benben's great-grandson. Yun-che wondered if that child with the smug face was this guy's great-grandfather. The young man thought Hadn't Luo Wei destroyed everyone he knew? Yunche wanted to ask something about his great-grandfather, but Chaoji said he didn't want to talk about it now. He asked Yunche not to humiliate him. The young man was very surprised. Chaoji wondered if Yunche had been hiding his true strength all this time. Chaoji said it was time for them to go to school. Tomorrow, there was a field trip to the Modern History Memorial Hall. They couldn't skip it. Yunche thought that now was not the time to hide his identity. If Chaoji started digging deeper, he might begin to suspect something. The Modern History Memorial Hall. Yunche thought that there might be records there of what had happened in the world after his death. The students traveled in an orderly fashion on public transportation to the memorial hall for a tour. Looking out the tram window, Yunche thought that everything in the world was different now. Everything had changed dramatically. Who would have thought back then that in the future, discoveries from the underground would be used as fuel for transportation? All of this was new to Yunche, although he had seen some of these innovations back then, in the dungeons. However, the young man believed that only items dropped by monsters could be taken from there. An epic ring made of chimera bone. It was created from the rib of a combat chimera and allowed the owner to attach the chimera's limb to their body. Yunche understood that such equipment and skill books could be stored in the inventory. They could be bought and sold outside the dungeons. But if some items cannot be placed in the inventory, then after defeating the Lord, they should disappear from the battlefield along with the dungeon. Yunche wondered with surprise what had happened to the world after he died. The tour guide told the young people that before them stood the greatest ruler of the kingdom, the king who had put an end to the terror of the dungeons. His name was Luo Wei. As many of the students knew, it was here that the legendary uprising took place more than 50 years ago. In those days, the kingdom suffered greatly from dungeon invasions, especially after the appearance of the most terrible of them all, the SSS-rank dungeon. Everyone lived in fear. It was the ruler Luo Wei who led the army into battle and spearheaded the liberation mission. Despite enormous losses, he finally conquered this terrifying dungeon. But suddenly, it turned out that they were facing a carefully planned uprising. As everyone knows, Yunche was behind this plan. He was the one whom the ruler trusted unconditionally, the one who turned out to be an ungrateful traitor. Yunche understood how they had turned everything upside down here. Yunche knew who had actually cleared the dungeon. It was those whom Luo Wei had ambushed. The teacher said that they could not even imagine the pain the king felt after such betrayal. However, the ruler, overcoming everything, bravely entered the battle, and, in the end, thanks to the help of the hero Ding Kun, successfully suppressed the rebellion. Yunche thought that he did not remember such a name. Ding Kun, the hooligans who had been harassing the young people on the riverbank the day before, said with surprise that the two were still alive, but they had been covered by a new dungeon. One of the young men recalled that the dungeon had been cleared. For a new location to be cleared so quickly, some kind of master had obviously been at work there. It seemed that these two were just incredibly lucky. All the students wondered in surprise. Could it be that Ding Shu had stumbled upon a new dungeon? Could they have survived after that? The bully approached Chao Zhi and said that this guy was born lucky to have come out alive and unharmed. But because of him, they almost got hurt too. How was Chao Zhi going to pay for this? Chao Zhi replied that it was clearly their fault. The hooligan said that Chao Zhi had completely lost his mind. It seemed that he needed to be reminded of something. The hooligan asked Chao Zhi if he could see the statue. Now he should look under the hero's feet. There lies his ancestor, the traitor Xiao En. The hooligan said that Chao Zhi was a descendant of a traitor. Therefore, no one would ever believe him, no matter what he said. Chao Zhi said that Ding Shu could insult him, but he should not touch his ancestor. The disciples began to say that the hero Ding Kun was actually Ding Shu's great-grandfather. Next to him now is Chao Zhi, the grandson of the traitor Xiao En. Could it be that the descendant of a traitor is insulting a hero? The world has gone mad. Fanatics said that this young man's ancestor had killed many people. If the hero had not intervened, who knows how many more people would have died. Ding Shu indignantly said that Chao Zhi could not insult his ancestor to his face. The teacher who approached said that he had always been fair, so now he wanted to say something. The teacher told Chao Zhi to apologize immediately. After all, the hero had spared his family. The teacher added that if the young man was unable to express his gratitude, he should at least not insult him. Ding Shu said that if he beat Chao Zhi in front of everyone now, people would only be happy, because no one would help a mad dog that was being taught a lesson. Moreover, everyone despised this dog anyway. Ding Shu asked if Chao Zhi really believed that the descendant of a hero could be wrong. He prepared to strike. However, at that moment, Yunche kicked Ding Shu in the face and said he would not allow this to happen. Ding Shu flew to the side and fell to the floor. Yunche asked if the hero's family had time to raise their offspring. The disciples saw, was this really Yunche? But this guy was unrecognizable. Did he really just kick Ding Shu? Yunche must have gone completely mad. What was he saying? How could he insult the family of a hero? Yunche was only at the 5th level and was the weakest in the class. What had gotten into this guy that he dared to touch Ding Shu? Ding Shu was indignant. How dare this punching bag raise his hand against him? He should be glad that they didn't touch him back then. He didn't dare to attack sneakily now. Ding Shu said that in that case, he would deal with both of them at once. His comrades rushed at the young man. Without hesitation, Yunche dealt with all the attackers. Ding Shu also got his share. The students present were shocked. How could this have happened? Ding Shu couldn't recover. Could it be that Yunche had just beaten him? The disciples were surprised. Could it be that Ding Shu had been knocked out again in a second? Was he really that weak? Ding Shu was outraged. How could a pathetic 5th level trash be stronger than him? The rage skill was activated. A fiery hammer appeared in the young man's hands. Ding Shu initiated a nuclear strike. Yun Che said that his opponent had opened up too much and punched him in the jaw. The deceptive blade skill was used. Ding Shu again did not understand how this was possible. However, he was deactivated and fell to the floor. A security guard appeared in the room and asked what the young people were doing there. Yun Che said that Ding Shu had lost consciousness and asked if there was a healer here. The students were surprised. Was Yun Che really that fast? Was he really only at the 5th level? But how was that possible? Was he hiding his strength? The security guard said that fighting was prohibited. They could destroy everything here. The teacher told Yun Che to step aside. First, they insulted the hero, and now his descendant. The teacher secretly took out a baton, but Yun Che knocked it out of his hands. Yun Che told the teacher not to waste his breath. The teacher talks about justice, but he only listened to Ding Shu's version of the story. Does he want to curry favor with his family? The teacher replied that the young man was talking nonsense. Seeing the ring on Yun Che's finger, the teacher was surprised. What kind of equipment was this? Although he did not use his full strength, the young man had effectively blocked his attack. Yun Che said that it was nothing personal. He was just stating a fact. He did not believe that the teacher was capable of such a thing. The teacher said he would handle this conflict according to all existing rules. Where could Yun Che have gotten this equipment? What else did he have in store? Yun Che thought that even though it was epic equipment, it was still dropped by a 21st level lord. Yun Che said that as punishment, the teacher could expel them from this pavilion. Chao Chu followed his friend to the exit. He was surprised. Could Yun Che really block even the teacher's attack? How could a student be capable of such a thing? The teacher said that Ding Shu needed to be healed urgently. The young men left the pavilion. Yun Che thought that it turned out that no one had survived. Ben Ben had been destroyed by this so-called hero. Yun Che looked at Chao Chu and thought that now he could ask him anything. He would answer without hesitation. Yun Che asked his friend to tell him about this hero, Ding Kun. Chao Chu said he wasn't sure if he remembered everything correctly. Ding Kun seemed to have known about the great villain Yun Che's conspiracy from the very beginning and had set up an ambush near the dungeon to help the ruler. In this way, they managed to put an end to the rebellion. Yun Che was surprised when he heard about the ambush near the dungeon. He had completely different memories. Chao Chu added that the hero Ding Kun had been determined since childhood to end the crisis caused by the dungeons and had trained hard for this. After receiving a promotion from the king, he fought year-round to save the world. For example, he participated in the battle at Winterfell. Yun Che recalled how he personally dealt with all the monsters in that battle. Yun Che inquired about the sword that the statue was currently holding. Chao Chu said that it was first-class equipment. It is said that it was with this sword that the hero destroyed the traitor Yun Che. Yun Che thought that he had not only taken the honors and glory, but also his sword. The young man decided to start with his head. The events unfold behind the wall of the Ding family estate. One of the young men looked back and saw two strangers. Yun Che thought that this guy was very vigilant. He was a bandit with the reconnaissance skill. Chao Chu told his friend that they needed to leave. There were too many guards here, so even if they managed to blend into the crowd, they would be finished as soon as Ding returned. Yun Che, of course, wanted to finish off this hero Ding Kun. However, according to Chao Ju, he had been in a high-level dungeon for a long time. In his previous life, Yun Che could enter and exit dungeons at will. However, such areas are guarded, and one can only enter them with a special pass. Yun Che believed that the Ding Shu family must have such a pass. Yun Che asked Chao Chu why he needed so many guards. Wasn't that a bit much for one of a dozen offspring? Chao Chu reminded him that these were the descendants of a hero. They even had their own dungeon. The young man noted that low-level dungeons had long been sold and bought privately. Didn't Yun Che know that? Those who did not have such power could not even imagine such a thing. Chao Chu added that Ding Shu usually has guards with him at all times to deal with monsters and raise his level. However, ordinary students can only fight monsters as part of school practice, and even then, they have to compete for all the points. Yun Che said that the world had indeed changed. So, the richer and more influential a person is, the higher their level? Chao Ju confirmed this. On average, graduates from ordinary schools have no more than level 20. Many of these people find themselves unable to connect their lives to the dungeon realm. They remain at the same level. If they manage to become miners or rangers in the dungeons, they can only reach about level 30 by middle age. Guards like the ones they had just seen could rub shoulders with the Ding Shu dungeon, so their level could be around 30. There are two ways to move up and gain access to the dungeons, and thus increase your level. Join the army, or take school exams to enter official organizations, such as a guild or the officer academy. Yun Che thought, if you become stronger, will you need a pass? Chao Chu said it would be better if they left this place. There is such a big difference in levels that even if you are an excellent fighter, you still won't be able to deal with the guards. Yun Che thought that with his current strength, it would not be easy to destroy even this hero, not to mention the great ruler, Luo Wei, who was under constant protection. However, the skills of a level 30 scout usually have a small range. These include Eagle Eye, heightened hearing, and summoning the spirit of a mouse. They are not enough to cover the entire state. Moreover, this is not a dungeon where life is fraught with constant danger, so most of the guards are simply idling, so it won't be that difficult to sneak in. The guards are much more relaxed than the near-perfect intelligence in high-level dungeons. Qiaozhi said that even if they managed to get inside, they could be killed in such private dungeons, and no one would ever know. Yuncha asked his friend if he didn't want to change his life. Qiaozhi replied that he did want to change it, but he could only do so if he joined the guild. Yuncha asked what Qiaozhi could change if he got in, since everyone considered him to be the great-grandson of the traitor Qiao Yi. Yuncha said that a person's fate is decided here and now. There's no point in leaving everything to chance, which may not even happen. Yuncha added that he personally was not going to miss out on the dungeon that was right under his nose. Qiaozhi could decide for himself whether to go to the dungeon or not. Yuncha wondered if Benben's descendant would make the same choice as him. Qiaozhi thought that he couldn't let his friend go into the dungeon alone. Yuncha said that they needed to be quiet and thought that there were no signs of the reconnaissance skill here. Yuncha grabbed Qiaozhi by the collar and said that they would move as quietly as possible. The young men chose their moment and moved easily, remaining unnoticed. Qiaozhi couldn't believe it. At the edge of the forest, the scouts discovered what was literally a private dungeon. The dungeon contained zombies of various levels. These zombies posed no danger to the young people. Yuncha concluded that there weren't that many monsters here. Apparently, the Ding family often organized cleanups here. Yuncha told his friend that there were only 2 small monsters here, so the guy could take action. Qiaozhi was frightened. Did he really have to fight them? He definitely couldn't defeat them. Qiaozhi approached the monsters and activated his unique abilities, using a protective barrier. The young man said that he had trusted his friend, and now he was left to deal with the situation alone. Qiaozhi continued to defend himself from the monster's attacks, using his energy shield. The young man said that he shouldn't have come here, and that he'd better go home. Yuncha, watching from the sidelines, told Qiaozhi to start fighting already. How long could he just defend himself? Qiaozhi replied that he didn't even have a chance to fight off these monsters. Yuncha said that he had everything under control, so Qiaozhi need not fear the consequences. The young man gathered his courage and attacked the monster. To his surprise, the monster flew backwards. Watching the confrontation, Yuncha concluded that this guy had excellent skills. However, he was constantly frightened and easily panicked, so he usually only dared to defend himself. However, his intuitive judgment of the position of targets in space turned out to be very accurate. This allowed him to stay close enough to his opponent while continuing to defend himself. Qiaozhi said that he wouldn't last long. Many people stay in one place simply because they lack the courage to challenge themselves. Yuncha mentally told Benben that his great-grandson had already taken a step forward. Qiaozhi was surprised to see that his level had risen. Yuncha said that experience was distributed according to the significance of the attack. Even if Qiaozhi threw the monsters off balance, if he didn't destroy them himself, he wouldn't gain much experience. Yuncha appeared to have a bone blade of sorrow in his hands. Yuncha concluded that Qiaozhi was quite agile and asked how he distributed his stat points. The young man replied that, apart from mental strength, he usually distributed them evenly. Yuncha said that shield bearers usually don't increase their agility. Qiaozhi replied that without it, he wouldn't be able to find a team at school. If he waited for a slow shield bearer, all the monsters would go to others. Yuncha noted that it was necessary to think about the long term. To level up after 60, certain requirements would have to be met. For example, the Bastion Fortress class requires 60 points of endurance and 90 points of defense. You can't just randomly distribute your stats. Qiaozhi said that ordinary people can reach a maximum of level 40 in their entire lives. How could anyone even think about level 60 since it's S-rank? Yuncha said that from now on, Qiaozhi could think about S-rank. Yuncha added that it was possible to plan for an even higher rank. It was time to plan for career growth. Yuncha thought that, until then, he had only managed thanks to his hidden skill, Reflected World. If nothing unfair happened, then the Reflected World had a level, and it could be raised. Yuncha began to do what he did best, destroy monsters in the dungeon. After a while, he asked how Qiaozhi was feeling. The young man noticed that the blade skill had ended. This skill is powerful, but not suitable for long battles, just like his endurance. However, things are going faster than with a normal level increase. Now, he was 2 levels higher. Yuncha received the information and concluded that destroying these monsters accumulated Reflected World experience. Now it was necessary to collect the loot. The young people saw the Ding family's guards from a secluded spot in the dungeon. The guards were patrolling the area more and more frequently. Qiaozhi said that there were already far fewer monsters, but the risk would only increase if they continued on their way. Yuncha thought his friend was right. When fighting monsters, one must avoid the attention of the guards, as well as calculate the bonuses and duration of the deceptive blade. This was quite difficult for him at the moment. Based on the skill book that had just appeared, it could be said that not all of the reflected skills were helpful in battle. The young man was still 30% short of leveling up. If his first level was so strong, then after leveling up, he would become even more powerful. If he destroyed the lord of this dungeon, he could immediately advance to the 2nd level. However, not all dungeons would allow him to farm experience for the Reflected World. Yuncha decided to go and see the lord of this place. The Summon Mouse Spirit and Summon Owl skills were activated. The Scout skills were becoming more and more apparent. The young people had reached their intermediate goal. Before them stood the lord of this dungeon. As was to be expected in such cases, it was a huge monster sitting on a throne. Qiaozhi said that this was the first time he had seen the lord of a controlled dungeon. At school, he was usually guarded by a teacher, and no one was allowed to approach him. The young man thought that this goal must be very high level. Yuncha noticed that there were many guards around. If he started to act, even more guards would rush over. With his current level, it was practically impossible to destroy the Lord under siege. Yuncha crept up behind a guard and decided that in that case, he would start with them. He used his deceptive blade. The guard was deactivated. The guard was wounded and fell to the ground. Yuncha told the wounded guard that he was going to conduct a biased interrogation, so it would be better to be honest right away. The frightened guard said he was ready to tell everything and was waiting for questions. The Ding family doesn't pay very much, and it's not worth his life. The guard said that there were many passes to the hero's private dungeon, and that they were kept in the old master's office. This was not so unusual. The guard added that he was not lying. He had seen the master take a pass from his office several times and leave with the chief guard. However, this is a temporary permit that does not contain any information about the person. Therefore, if there is no one nearby who can confirm the person's identity, an interrogation is mandatory. Yuncha told the guard to retrieve everything he had in the system storage. Yuncha led the guard out of the dungeon. The young man asked if there were any other books on bard skills. The guard replied that there were no more. He added that the Ding family was so stingy that they took everything they found in the dungeon. They had to be content with the scraps. Everything interesting was in the inner residence. The guard showed him where the Din family's inner residence was, and added that even guards were not allowed to enter without a summons. Since everyone in the Ding family, except for Ding Shu, who is still young, is level 30 or above, and has first-class equipment, they do not need security. Yunchu asked if he could get a pass to enter the house. The guard said that it was not possible at the moment, because the owner was inside. After studying the information, Yunche determined that the mustachioed man in the inner residence was level 42. He couldn't handle him alone. The old master and the third head were both above level 50. However, they were not present at the moment. Yunche wondered if he had really decided to go to the residence to meet the head of the family, who was many levels above him. The guard had been deactivated and lost consciousness. Now he could be left behind without fear of him raising the alarm. Yunche told Qiaoji to stay here. The protagonist decided it would be better to simply lure him out. To control the Lord, they use higher level chains. As long as he is alive, the dungeon does not disappear, and this can continue for a very long time. But at the same time, they also posted guards to watch over the locks on these chains. It was a kind of backup plan. However, such a safety net assumes that no one would even think of opening these locks. Yunche crept up behind the guard. Yunche plunged his blade into the guard's chest and killed him. The guards heard the noise and became alert. What could be happening there? Yunche decided that there was no better way to lure the Lord out. The Lord of the dungeon rose from his seat and began to break the chains. The guards were surprised. Why had they suddenly lost control of the Lord? Outside the dungeon, on the grounds of the Ding family estate, the head shouted for the guards not to hesitate and go to the dungeon to help. Yunche received level 60 equipment. Having taken possession of the chains, the young man thought that it would now be much easier to enter the inner residence. A car pulled up to the gate of the inner residence of the Ding family estate, and the assistant opened the door and greeted the second head and the young master. Ding Shu told Ding Hao, the second head of the Ding family, that there was no need to pick him up. Nothing serious had happened. It was just that Yunche had gotten too big for his boots. Ding Hao replied that it was simply on his way. Mrs. Yunsha got out of the car. She was also accompanied by security guards. Ding Hao greeted the girl and invited her into his modest abode. Ding Hao noticed a servant standing nearby and kicked him aside. Ding Hao and the young people went inside, leaving the servant lying on the ground. Qiao Xu watched the scene from the sidelines and analyzed the situation. The head of the family had returned, so it was not worth going in. Yunche asked his friend what had happened to his face. Qiaozhi was surprised that Yunche had managed to return so quickly. Yunche said that the guards were now dealing with the Lord. Even though he was only at the 30th level, it wasn't easy to capture him alive, so even without his help, they would still have to work hard. Yunche asked his friend what he had seen there. Qiaozhi pointed to the servant and said that it was his uncle, Qiao Li. This man was at level 17. Qiaozhi added that when Yunche started the rebellion, his family had already been killed. Thanks to this, they were able to avoid endless humiliation, which could not be said for Chao's family. Under the secret orders of the hero Ding Kun, the attacks and bullying only intensified. Qiaozhi added that in the end, they were effectively forced to become slaves to the Ding family. They were brought out into the open from time to demonstrate the power and favor of the hero's family. In order to survive, the Chao family had to endure all kinds of hardships while watching the Ding family prosper. The young man said that his parents tried to change things. However, his father lost his mind, and his uncle became a servant of the hero's family. Yuncho was determined and said it was time for them to pay a visit. Qiao Tri was surprised. After all, Ding Shu's father was also there. He was at level 42 and fully equipped. If they crossed the threshold of the residence, they would surely meet their doom. Yunchi said that in the age of private dungeons, there was no hope of starting from scratch without taking risks. The young man added that some steps could never be taken if one thought about them for too long. Yuncha said he would help his friend change, but only if he made the decision himself. He chose confrontation, but he was not going to force his friend. Qiaochi wondered what they could possibly oppose such an influential family with. Yuncha replied that he wanted to fight, and against the entire kingdom. Ding Hao wondered how the Lord had managed to free himself from their bonds. Yunsha asked if everything was alright and suggested that they could come back another time. Ding Hao replied that everything was fine and that his brother would take care of everything. Lady Yunsha was more important than any dungeon. Moreover, upon learning of her visit, his father and third brother were already on their way home. Ding Hao added that they had more than enough strength to deal with this misunderstanding. His grandfather had also been informed, and the hero was very eager to meet Yunsha. Yunsha remembered his friend's words that a pass and an escort were required to enter the dungeon. This girl definitely had a special high status, judging by how she was treated. Yunche noted that Yunsha had the same surname as him. However, right now, he needed to focus on getting the pass. Yunsha sneaked into the estate owner's office. There was no one else there but him. Representatives of the Ding family came out of the basement. The elder said that they were finally done with this lord. Ding Yi, the head of the family, said that someone had deliberately let him out. However, the culprit had escaped, and they couldn't take such a risk for the sake of a single high-level artifact. Ding Yi ordered the guards to surround the inner residence. The head of the family thought it would be very bad if they disturbed the guest. Yunche searched everywhere, but couldn't find a single pass. But Chaoji said there should be many of them here. Yunche used the void technique skill. The void technique is the ability to turn objects the size of a brick into nothingness. In one of the boxes, the young man found a diary. There were also high-quality skill books in this box. Guards were stationed around the perimeter of the Ding family estate. Chaoji looked outside and wondered why these guards were now everywhere. The young man decided that it was too dangerous here now. There were more and more guards. If Yunche didn't leave right now, he would have no chance of escaping. Chaoji thought that if he didn't escape now and was discovered, they would have another reason to torment the Chao family. Chaoji decided that it would be better to leave quietly. At least that way he would stay alive. However, he remembered his friend's words that he could only help him change if Chaoji himself wanted it. Chaoji sneezed on purpose, and the guards heard it. The young man started to run, and the guards immediately rushed after him. Chaoji thought that now Yunche could leave. He would distract the guards. Yunche thought that Chaoji had finally overcome his fears and decided to fight. The young man jumped out of the window and shouted that he had chains and skill books. The guards could try to take them if they could. Ding Yi shouted for the guards to go to the lord immediately. The fugitive was not leaving the territory. He was heading for the dungeon. Chaoji thought he had managed to distract them all. With so many guards, the lord must be well protected. To bring him back under control, they must have fought with all their might. This means that the lord must not be in the best condition right now. Yunche decided to deal with the lord and raise the level of the reflected world. Yunsha and Ding Hao continued to wait for the rest of the Ding family in the office. Yunsha said that if the Ding family had encountered some kind of force majeure, the Mr. Ding Hao could go, and she would stay here alone. Ding Hao replied that it was just some petty thief, and that his older brother would handle it perfectly well. The older brother, Ding A, was seriously alarmed and shouted for the robbers and archers to follow him to the intruder. Yunche effectively evaded his pursuers. Yunche understood that any class could add 3 points to one of its stats when leveling up. He invested half of his points in agility. In addition, he used the acceleration skill, so among the 30th levels, no one could keep up with him except archers and bandits. Yunche saw the dungeon lord lying unconscious. The guards surrounded the giant and were on high alert. They were afraid that someone would harm the lord, so they put a seal on him. Now, he was at his weakest. It was time to act. All that remained was to build up his strength to the maximum, and he could finish off the lord with one blow. The guards and bandits noticed the stranger and regrouped to protect the lord. Yunche prepared to attack and used the skill Spikes of Chaos. The guards were confused. What kind of skill was this? They had never seen anything like it before. It was a skill that imposed an abnormal status. The guards' resistance did not work. Human resistance to anomalies is not the same as that of monsters. How could he use this skill so easily? The level of abnormality of the ability was simply off the charts. Yunche thought that he just needed to walk through the squad and get to the weakened lord. This rabble had no experience in team combat. The kingdom had lived in peace long enough to degenerate. The guards were perplexed. Could they really not handle one person? It is necessary to pin down the stranger and finish him off together. Dean E said that if no one could stop him, he would take care of it himself. The head of the Dean family activated his equipment. Dean E approached the young man and initiated a fire explosion. Yunche thought that now his opponent was caught. The young man understood that although he was not high enough in level to get a stat bonus from these targets, they were level 60, and that would be enough. The blow was strong enough to break through the seal barrier, but Yunche was thrown back by the shockwave. Yunche landed on his feet and thanked him for his help. Ding A shouted at his opponent not to dare do that. Yunche decided it was time to take the EXP for the lord. The lord was defeated. The protagonist was unharmed. The experience points for the reflected world were fully earned, and the skill level was increased. The bandits surrounded Yunche. An order was given to capture him. Ding Yi came closest and prepared to attack the protagonist himself. However, Yunche suddenly disappeared. Yunche found himself in the mirror world. The young man was able to stay in the mirror world for half an hour. Now it became clear why everything here seemed to be mirrored from the real world. It resembled an illusion. However, the stones here were real. The mirror stone could be picked up and taken away. Yunche thought that at the second level, the skill allowed him not only to move to the mirror world, but also to take items from there. Yunche wondered if anything new had appeared in the system. There were indeed new skills. but almost all of them remained inactive. The original skills had not yet been mastered. Reflected versions of all abilities were displayed here. However, to activate them, one must first learn the original in the real world. It turns out that the first level reflection is just a stripped-down version of the second level. Souls appeared before the young man. Yunche was surprised at how many there were. The next moment, one of the souls turned into an undead creature. Yunche was surprised. Was this really possible? The young man prepared himself for a possible confrontation with the undead. After reading the necromantic contract, Yunche realized that after defeating the undead, he would be able to take it with him and summon it whenever he wanted. Yunche realized that he was holding ordinary stones. It seemed that the second level of the reflected world allowed not only objects to be transferred into reality, but also dead creatures. It was strange. Why didn't this guy appear after the dungeon dissipated? The guards didn't understand how he could just vanish into thin air. Maybe it was the bandits' camouflage skills? One of the bandits said that was impossible. Camouflage has visual effects and time limitations. It cannot make someone completely invisible. Ding Yi angrily asked what was going on here and why so many people had missed one guy. Ding Yi said that if the guards couldn't find him, then they would have to pay for the dungeon. At that moment, Yunchi appeared out of nowhere. The system announced that the time for walking through the reflected world had expired. Yunche realized that he was returning to the same place from which he had disappeared. Were there really no other conditions? Dean E ordered the guards to arrest this man immediately. Yunche said there was no need to rush. After all, they had been chased hard. It was time to repay them in kind. Yunche summoned the undead and said he wanted them to have a good time with this army. The guards were frightened by what this meant. Were they evil spirits? Ding Yi told the people not to panic. They were just necromantic creations. He had seen many like them before. A skeleton attacked a guard, who managed to put up a shield in front of him. Judging by their status, they were only level 20. Dean E told everyone to calm down. Anyone who wanted a raise should catch this stranger. The guards were delighted and became even more motivated. However, the man disappeared. Yunche left the area. He understood that the summoned undead were still weak. Yunche thought that if he could find stronger spirits, this rabble would no longer be able to stop him. However, of all the undead that had been found, the 20 strongest were already bound by contract. The reflected world also had limits to its exploration. It was only possible to move within a radius of 200 meters. Yunche thought that he would have to explore the reflected world in other places. Perhaps he would be able to find high-level undead there. Once outside, our hero saw one of the guards catch Chaudhry. The guard asked, "Did the young man really think he could escape from him? There would definitely be a good reward for this guy." Yunche jumped towards the guard, delivered a crushing blow, and freed his friend from his grasp. Yunche grabbed Chaudhry by the collar and said they were getting out of there. In the dungeon, the guards and bandits continued to fight the undead army. The guards knew that these skeletons weren't that weak, but why did they keep coming back to life? Ding Ge, the third head of the Ding family, nicknamed Three Beards, said that they were summoned creatures. They would have to be destroyed several more times. In the inner residence, the old man asked, "Has Lady Yunsha already left?" Ding Hao apologized to his father and said that he was unable to stop her. The intruder acted too aggressively. He broke a window and flew out of the house screaming. They were unable to detain him. Ding Dan, the son of the hero, Ding Kun, the old master, asked, could the intruder really have made his way into the house? So not only did his son let him escape, but he doesn't even know what he looks like? Does he really think he is doing a good job after that? Ding Hao, without raising his head, said that it was his fault. Ding Hao said that Lady Yunsha had agreed to go to the hero's dungeon, so what had happened did not interfere with his grandfather's plans. Ding Dan said that when he found out who was behind this, that person would regret it. They had to check if anything had been stolen. Yunche had Chaudhry's temporary pass in his hands. Now all that remained was to find someone who could guide them through the dungeon where this hero was located. However, there was no rush for that now. Yunche thought that he had risen to the 20th level in Ding Shu's house. And although he had almost destroyed the ring, he had grabbed a dozen skill books from their collection. Bards mainly have support skills. These skills can be used to accumulate stats. Yunche believed that soon he would be able to crush opponents of his level with stats alone. The armor of the Wicked Knight would also come in handy soon. But the most important thing was that Yunche was able to raise the level of the reflected world. His combat power had greatly increased thanks to the contract with the undead, which was possible at the new level. However, that was not enough. Judging by the equipment on that statue, the hero was at least an S-class berserker. He needed to make a contract with undead of at least the same level and rise to at least level 50 before he could finish him off. Chaudhry asked, "Won't they find us?" Yunche said there was no need to worry. The guards had definitely lost track of them, and no one had seen their faces. Yunche thought that Chaudhry was still worried about his safety. At his age, that was natural. The protagonist asked his friend if there was a dungeon nearby where someone very powerful had died. He needed a high-level dungeon to level up. Chaudhry thought for a moment and said that there was such a place nearby. However, the problem was that it was located in a school, and they had no chance of getting in. Yunche thought that in that case, they would have to take unconventional measures. In a private residence, the man received a rare purple skill book and asked in surprise, "Is this all for him?" He thought that Yunche really did have someone influential behind him. The teacher said that the time and order of use of the school dungeon were strictly regulated. There was nothing that could be done about it. However, there is one dungeon that was recently opened for future graduates. Lower grades are not allowed to go there. However, if we are talking about exceptionally outstanding students, then, on the recommendation of the teacher, they can be accepted into the team. The teacher said he would try to get the young people a place. Yun Che found himself in the right place. Those present discussed their plans for this dungeon. Someone said that this might be his last dungeon in his life. Some said that if it weren't for the hero, they wouldn't have had this opportunity. Yun Che thought that something was wrong with this dungeon. The teacher said that this was the Dungeon of Valor, gifted to the school by the hero Ding Kun. Rumor has it that the hero once fought here, and traces of his battles can still be found. Cao Zhi thought that this was the very place where the hero valiantly destroyed the traitor Qiao En. The teacher said that the level of this dungeon was quite high, so caution was necessary. He added that Xiao Si should take care of the young people. The teacher said that the dungeon was open, and they could go through. Xiao Si didn't want to babysit the youngsters. Xiao Si said that it was a burden to drag these two along. Once they went inside, they had to follow him and not cause any trouble. Yun Che thought that this dungeon was no higher than level 40. In that case, why did he feel such great danger? The young people found themselves inside the Dungeon of Valor and moved along the set route. Xiao Si saw that Yun Sha and Yun Yin were now here. They weren't graduates either. Xiao Si said it would be great if Yun Sha went with them. He would be over the moon if a girl accompanied him.
The knight said that it never hurts to dream. However, this girl was from the highest league, above level 30. They would have to beg the girls to take them with them.
The knight said that Xiao Si definitely didn't belong in their ranks. The young man admitted that he knew that. Yun Sha walked past our hero, and he recognized her. She was the guest from the Ding family's house. But what did she want from him? Yun Che suggested that Yun Sha might know the guy who owned this body, or had come to stand up for Ding Shu. Yun Sha told the young man that she had seen him the day before in the memorial hall. He was a good fighter, and he had a very recognizable voice. Yun Che thought that this girl had just come to talk to him. Yun Sha said that his voice was easy to recognize, even among the sounds of breaking glass. Yun Che thought that the girl recognized him from the 2 words he shouted the day before. She added that they would go on a reconnaissance mission today. Yun Che thought that she had recognized him, but didn't give him away. Instead, she just told him. Was this a warning? The young man thought that Ding Shu might also recognize their voices. However, as long as the Ding family hadn't come for him, everything was fine. At this rate of leveling up, he would soon not care at all. Yun Che looked at the girls and thought that if they didn't show hostility, he would repay them in kind. The young man said that caution was necessary. This dungeon was dangerous. Yun Sha said that she also felt something similar, although with her level, that shouldn't be the case. In any case, she thanked him for the warning. Those present were surprised. Was this really Yun Sha? She was usually so cold. Why was she talking to this guy like that? The young people asked Yun Che how he knew Yun Sha. Were they close? Could he introduce them? Yun Che apologized and said it was time for them to go. They would go alone. The young people were surprised. Were they really going to go alone? After all, the weakest monsters here were level 20. Xiao Si said to let them go. If this guy was friends with Yun Sha, then his level was far from low. The young people were surprised. After all, Teacher Li had told them to keep an eye on them. Xiao Si told them not to forget why they were here. The fewer people who knew about this place, the better. After all, he didn't want to share these precious crystals with anyone else. Besides, everyone had signal flares. Xiao Si didn't understand why this mediocre boy was talking to Yun Sha. Such self-confidence deserved to be destroyed. A young man appeared at the entrance to the dungeon. He ran up to the teachers. The man asked what Ding Shu was doing here. Ding Shu asked if the team had just gone inside. The teacher confirmed this and asked what the young man wanted. Ding Hao told Ding Shu not to blame them, just because they attacked him in the memorial hall. He didn't have time for childish squabbles. Ding Shu said that they were the ones who broke into their house. He recognized their voices. Ding Yi said that if these intruders could easily escape his guards, they were unlikely to be ordinary schoolchildren. Ding Yi added that Ding Shu had to prove that these schoolchildren were stronger than a dozen guards. Otherwise, he couldn't support him. Dean Dan said that this was the end of the matter. They were busy with important matters and should not be disturbed. Ding Shu said that Yun Che and Chao Zhi had gone inside. He needed to enter the underground cave.
Yun Che used his skills to fight the monsters.
Chao Zhi shouted approvingly. Another monster was defeated. The deceptive blade played an important role in this. Chao Zhi checked the information and said that he had also leveled up a little. Yun Che thought that among the skill books he had expropriated from the Ding family, there were 2 excellent skills: Surrounding Shield and Encouraging Shout. Chao Zhi could now use them too. The monsters here were not weak. However, with these skills, it would be much easier. The young man thought that, according to that teacher, a rare mob, the Obsidian Monster, lived in this dungeon. If he was lucky, this monster could drop the support skill, Gravitational Pull. It was one of the skills of the Reflected World. However, there are not only obsidian monsters here, but also undead creatures. This will help find the place where all these powerful fighters died. Their souls must be near the place of their death. Looking down from the cliff, the young man saw something strange below.
What kind of monsters are these?
Below was a canyon of crystal columns. Yun Che wondered, could all these obsidian monsters be moving in a group? They had traveled at least a kilometer, which was beyond the usual range of movement for monsters. Could this be the wandering type? Wandering types are rare dungeon monsters that do not have a permanent habitat and are constantly on the move.
They are much stronger than ordinary monsters.
In the past, when humans were weaker, an encounter with a wandering type meant a bloody battle. They could also venture outside of dungeons. This led to inevitable disasters. However, defeating these high-risk creatures meant gaining a large amount of experience and better loot than from ordinary monsters. Yuncha decided to start with an experiment and used his continuous regeneration skill. Mana beams were applied. However, the obsidian monsters attacked too quickly. Yunche was wounded. The young man understood that even at super speed, he could not dodge all the attacks. His defense and HP were too low. If it weren't for Chaoji's shields, he would already be dead. Yuncha activated the undead summon. There was no way around it. However, even the undead couldn't cope. Fortunately for our hero, the monsters were quite slow. The young man managed to retreat. To defeat these monsters, Yunche knew he would have to rely on Chaoji's help. The young people came to an area with low-level monsters. Yunche decided to farm them to level up his friend. In team combat, the shield bearer is the key to survival. He holds the main line of defense. Everyone else hides behind him, which allows for better damage distribution. Chaoji transferred all his points to defense. In addition, he now had armor from the Ding family guard. Now, he at least possessed the most important characteristics of a shield bearer. He could already withstand level 20 attacks. Yuncha began to give instructions. Chaoji must shift his center of gravity and stand firmly on his feet. The shield should be held at an angle toward the attack. Chaoji followed all the instructions. Chaoji noticed that his stamina was now decreasing more slowly than before. Yunche told his friend not to get distracted. The monster was still attacking. Chaoji lost his footing and flew backwards. Yunche attacked the obsidian monster to help his friend. Yuncha said that they must not lose concentration and must be prepared for subsequent attacks. They must not swing their shields carelessly, otherwise they would be open to their opponent's blows. They must remain alert, but their bodies must move freely. You only need to tense up when defending. But in general, the young man should continue in the same vein. Yunche added that he was always behind. A shield bearer must always keep one eye on his teammates behind him. Chaoji said that he would listen to all of his mentor's recommendations. Yunche reminded him that when the difference in stats is small, skill determines the winner. After a while, the obsidian monster was destroyed. Chaoji said that he had succeeded. Yuncha thought that now this guy would fight with more confidence, which meant he would get more experience points. Chaoji happily said that he was now at level 15. Now he could master the skill. Skill book, armor. This skill applied external armor to the shield, increasing its durability and protection. Yuncha thought that this was the last of the skill books they had taken from the Ding family. Now Chaoji could reinforce his shields with armor. With such a buff, they could even go up against the elite wanderers. They were talking about the Crystal Column Canyon. There were indeed many high-level wanderers in this region. The team of teachers, observing these monsters, was surprised. Where did so many high-level wanderers come from? It was too dangerous for the students, and these monsters had to be eliminated. The teachers believed that they could handle ordinary level 30 monsters, but elite monsters were a different matter. The teachers received a signal from the student and decided to help him. They understood that these monsters were very dangerous. One of the teachers said he would stay here just in case and continue to monitor the monsters from a safe zone. The other teachers agreed. Their colleague would remain here to observe. If the rescue mission encountered the wanderers, 2 teachers would hardly be able to cope. The support of the majority was needed. Yuncha told the teachers who had arrived that the monsters were not very fast. Besides, they had not been detected yet. If they kept their distance and just observed, everything would be fine, so they could go with peace of mind. The teachers warned that these monsters are extremely dangerous and that it is impossible to act alone. The young people should stay in the shadows. If they were spotted by the monsters, there would be no escape from danger. However, our hero was determined and believed that in the current situation, the monsters would not be able to escape him. Yuncha called on the undead for help, activated some of his skills, and the monster was finished. The young man believed that with each battle with the wandering ones, he was becoming more proficient in this class. However, when compared to his previous life, things were, of course, much worse. Now, with his reflected skills, he could raise his ATK quite well, but the bard's basic attack structure was still low. It would be nice to improve it. Yuncha understood that rare elite monsters gave a lot of experience. In addition, they left behind some good loot. The protagonist got a decent weapon that increased his attack power. It was the crystal sword. It compensated for his lack of basic ATK. Yuncha decided that it would be much easier to fight now. The young man regretted that the monster did not drop the book, Gravitational Attraction. It seemed that the chance of it dropping was very slim. Our hero decided that it would be nice to meet more wanderers. The teacher looked in Yunche's direction and thought, because that was where the call for help had come from. But this time, it was a special signal that only the team of teachers had. The squad discovered a huge number of wanderers. But why were there so many of them here? Yuncha was surprised. Something was wrong with these monsters. One of the teachers said that it wasn't clear yet. However, the main thing was to rescue their comrades. He said that the signal had clearly been sent from the cave. Apparently, the students were stuck there. A rescue operation must be organized immediately. The rescuers were tense. because there were so many monsters there. Even if all the teachers got together, it might not be enough. Yunsha said she considered it her duty to join the rescue expedition. Yunsha activated her exclusive skill, Secret Star Art. Magic circles began to appear along her path. Everyone present immediately appreciated her mental strength and powerful buff. This girl was at least epic level. Gravitational pull was activated. Yunsha's assistant used the skill Hidden Strike, and the monster was defeated. The students were surprised. Were these girls really that strong? Now it was definitely possible to rescue those who were stuck. Yunsha and Yunyin were incredible, as expected. Yunchi immediately determined that these girls had top-level equipment and skills. They could handle many tasks on their own. Xiaochu was curious about what was happening inside. Why had so many wandering monsters gathered together? Yunchi told his friend that he was going on a reconnaissance mission, and Xiaoji would remain here as the senior member. The protagonist decided to take a half-hour walk through the mirror world. The place was covered with crystals that acted as mirrors, so he could enter the mirror world at any moment. However, our hero never figured out how to return to reality. The day before, at the Ding family's house, when the time for his walk was up, he was unable to return. Yunchi was surprised. Do humans have mirror images? But monsters don't? But their destroyed bodies are material. Yunchi thought, could it be that only he has a physical shell in this space? The protagonist saw the images of the squad members, and even recognized one of them. It seems to be Xiaoxi. It seems that the wandering ones gathered here because of them, and then sent a signal for help.
They are relying on the narrow passageway, so I don't think the monsters will get them anytime soon. What are the monsters really interested in?
There were solid crystals all around, which prevented a full view. However, what the protagonist saw surprised him greatly. Among the crystals, the young man noticed a mirror-like crystal ore. Now it became clear why Xiaoxi and his team had come here. These crystals are different from those found outside. Unique materials that are not found in the outside world can be found in the dungeons. Masters use them to create special artifacts and equipment. This ore is one such material. Its value is several times higher than gold. Yunchi received information that he could pick up and take the mirror crystal ore with him. The hero realized that all he had to do was find a reflective surface to return to reality. He needed to find the time to study this skill better. It clearly had a lot of untapped potential. Yunchi decided that it would be a good idea to explore the area first. The amount of ore here was unrealistically large. If you mined it all, it would be enough to make anyone a billionaire. No wonder all the wandering monsters flocked here. The gravitational pull skill was activated again. Yunsha did her job. Yunyin activated the double blade dance skill. The skill, Art of Star Rain, was also used. Those present understood that these girls had epic level skills. How could they be so strong? They were cooler than any of the teachers. At some point, the students realized that they had been unlocked and were now free. Finally, they were saved. Xiaoxi said that he thought they would never get out. Now he feels relieved. Yunyin said that they shouldn't relax. They still had to fight their way back. Yunsha suggested that the way back would be a little easier. However, the wandering creatures from all over the dungeon had gathered here. The squad was surrounded. In the mirror world, the protagonist felt like he was in a maze. Yunsha saw a bright glow ahead. What could it be? Could it be the dungeon's secret treasure? If crystal ore is a special resource of this dungeon, then the crystal core is its unique and irreplaceable secret treasure. It is the condensed crystallized essence of all the ore in the dungeon. Its formation takes years, and the process itself is very unstable. One could live their entire life and never see it. Every secret treasure, without exception, has a special effect. The reflected image of the crystal core not only boosts base stats, but also reduces damage. The bonus to endurance means that the hero will receive more HP. Faster mana regeneration will allow you to use Deceptive Blade more often. But what is definitely important is the damage reduction. Damage reduction in percentage terms is rare, even for top-tier equipment, and at the same time, the item does not even take up a slot in the equipment. Considering how ore attracts wanderers, it is logical to assume that there is a monster here that surpasses the wandering type in strength. Yunche decided to use the secret treasure and head for the exit. All members of the expedition heard a loud noise and felt the ground shake violently. The tension grew. Could it be the Lord of the Wanderers? Why did he come here? The expedition members speculated that this Lord of the Wandering existed independently of the Lord of the Dungeon. It was a rare secret boss, and it was approaching the people. His power far exceeded that of ordinary lords. No teacher, let alone a student, could defeat him. Our hero believed that such monsters only existed in high-level dungeons. So where did such a monster come from here? The members of the squad believed that they would not get out of here alive. Yunsha got everyone's attention and told them to calm down. If they wanted to get out, they had to work together. That was the most important thing right now. Yunsha pointed in a direction and said that this canyon was their chance to escape. If they managed to break through the gorge, they would be able to get out of the dungeon. The secret star art was activated. Yunsha emphasized that no one should hold back. They had to fight with all their might and fight their way to the exit. The teachers believed that they had a duty to at least get the students out and prepared for successive attacks. They were advancing, but at a slow pace. Still, salvation was closer. The squad was almost at their destination. A battle cry rang out among the monsters, and a general assembly was announced. The number of monsters began to increase. People were puzzled. Where did so many come from? The monsters activated their crystal aura, and their tactical and technical characteristics increased significantly. The people immediately noticed that the monsters' attacks had become much more powerful. The damage from these attacks was too great. There was not even enough time to recover. People began to call for help. There were casualties among the defenders. Even one of the teachers was taken out of action. Yunsha called on the shield bearers to move forward and the priests to focus on healing the wounded. The woman understood that everyone was exhausted, even before the Lord appeared. Now they were barely holding on, and the monster hadn't even struck for real yet. People thought they were failing. At this rate, they would never make it through, because there were now significantly more monsters. One of the resistance fighters activated the hide skill and, armed with a cold weapon, moved forward, closer to the monsters. The man said it would be better if everyone fended for themselves. Breaking out of the defensive perimeter, this lone fighter rushed headlong, wanting to get out of the gorge. The teacher shouted for the bandits not to follow him. It was a bad example. Hide would not last long enough for him to escape. Suddenly, there was a powerful explosion. It was the monster's reaction to the defector. The teacher said that the monster had simply incinerated him. The people remained in a tight circle. The number of monsters continued to increase. The people noticed that the canyon had been destroyed. Had this explosion destroyed their last hope? Now there was definitely no escape. The monster lord relentlessly approached the squad. The student cried out that now it was truly all over. This giant monster was coming toward them. There was no way to stop it. Yunsha told everyone with high strength to move to the perimeter on the side of the giant monster. This shield was level 70. Its durability was beyond doubt. However, precisely because of this, no one has a high enough level to equip it. In addition, it is too cumbersome to move around. The teachers were still puzzled. Where could such a monstrous monster have come from in the school dungeon? The teacher thought that they had held out for a very long time to save the students. Was it all for nothing now? The teacher looked at Yunche and Chao Chu and thought that at least those two were safe. Chao Chu's face seemed familiar to the teacher. Could it be that same guy? Weren't they supposed to stay in the valley? How did he end up here? The teacher managed to jump aside, where he had just been standing. The monster's fist came down. Chao Chu shouted that the surrounding shield was damaged and the perimeter defense had been breached. Now, there was no one to hold back the onslaught of the wandering ones. The teacher saw Chao Chu rush at the monster, using his shield. He was surprised. Where did this student get such strength? By this point, all the shield bearers had been taken out. All defenses had fallen. Was there really no hope left? Yunche looked at his friend and said that Chao Chu was working very effectively this time. Yunche told Chao Chi to rest a little, and he would take care of the rest himself. Shortly before that, the real world. The young man now had not only a reflected image of the crystal core, he had found its original in the real world. Now, thanks to the reflected world, all future discoveries could be doubled. The only difficulty was bringing this ore into the real world. It wasn't that simple. To retrieve the core, it takes 10 minutes of walking. Yunche decided that for now, he would only take the most valuable items. The crystal core had been used, and so had the reflected image of the crystal core. Yunche felt a strong vibration. What could have happened? The young man decided to try to pass through the reflected world. Yunche realized that the walks could be turned on and off before the time expired. When the timer reached 0, it would go into standby mode. The protagonist left the reflected world. Yunche was surprised. Where did so many monsters come from again? He understood that they were attracted by the ore, but not in such numbers. It seemed that it was the Lord of the Wandering who had been exuding that dangerous aura from the very beginning. Chao Chu and the others might be in danger. If you can enter and leave the reflected world at any time, it would be convenient to bypass all these monsters by using the teleportation to the reflected world. Now our hero was at level 24. A TK can be increased threefold. However, to fight the Lord of the Wandering Ones, who is stronger than other ordinary bosses, you need at least level 30, but even that is not enough. Yunche found himself in the mirror world again and saw the images of the same people hiding behind a huge shield. After covering the necessary distance, the protagonist left the reflected world again. Yunche noted that Chao Ji had done a great job this time as well. Yunche asked the students and their mentors if anyone had support skills. He needed buffs to be ready to fight the Wandering Ones. Yunsha activated the Secret Star Art skill. Chao Chu activated the skill Surrounding Shield. The protagonist's mental strength increased, and his ATK rose by 20%. Yunche thought that although the number of monsters was overwhelming, after using the core, his HP increased several times, and there was an increase in resistance to optical and electrical damage, so nothing threatened him. If these monsters were susceptible to chaos, it would be much easier to destroy them. The students were surprised. Wasn't Bard written in this man's status bar? Where did he get such high ATK, and what were these skills? The teacher thought, is this guy really that strong? It turns out he didn't need to worry about him. Yunche realized that it was much easier to farm with such rare monsters. Yunsha thought he was just a cheeky boy, but his strength exceeded all her expectations. One of the teachers said that this guy was definitely being sponsored and mentored by someone from outside. Otherwise, where did he get such power? Another teacher added that he had seen this guy before. He was just an ordinary student, nothing more. Everyone present noticed that the giant monster was preparing to strike again. Things were looking bad. The monster did indeed attack. Under the impact of shockwaves and light waves, the young people were forced to retreat temporarily. Yunche thought that even now, he would not be able to withstand this attack. As soon as the monster got closer, these shields would not be able to protect the people. At some point, the number of monsters decreased significantly. The teacher said that there was now an opportunity to break through to another exit. If they let the Lord get too close, it would be too late. They couldn't delay. No matter how strong this guy was, he couldn't defeat the boss alone. The teacher noted that these shields were very difficult to move. If they left their protection, everyone would be exposed to the attacks of the Lord of the Wandering Ones. Those present agreed. If they started moving, they would become easy targets. The shields were too heavy and could only be moved by putting them in the inventory. Yuncha said he would take on this task. The young man added that he would attack the monster and provoke it, while the others would use the moment to escape. Yuncha thought that if they didn't deal with this lord, it would gather monsters from all over the dungeon and might go out into the outside world. All previous cataclysms had been caused by wandering lords. Yuncha declared that he would stay here and destroy this lord. Yuncha distracted the monster, and everyone else took the opportunity to flee. They understood that no matter how strong this guy was, with so many monsters, his stamina would quickly be depleted. The teacher said that the faster they got out, the sooner the student would be able to leave. A colleague noticed that the guy seemed to have said he was going to destroy the Lord. The teacher added that the young man just wanted to reassure them. Everyone talks like that about the wandering one. Xiaozhi thought that he was still useless. At times like this, all he could do was run. Yunche was left alone with the monster. Yunche tried to get closer to the monster, maneuvering through the reflected world. However, his efforts were futile. The Lord's defense was too great. The damage Yunche inflicted was too weak. The monster recovered immediately. Yunche realized that he would have to break through to that point. The crystal on the monster's head was probably something like a heart, which meant it was its most vulnerable spot. However, the hero still didn't have enough power to attack. The student's buffs were coming to an end. Yunche thought that he needed to level up first. He looked at the monster and realized that it was aiming at the place where he could potentially appear. There was almost nothing left of the walk. Almost all the time was up. If he relied on it to dodge, it would end immediately. There were no more than 4 minutes left. Yunche thought that he could use the undead to cover himself now, but that would consume a lot of MP, and he wouldn't have enough to stack ATK later. Yunche decided it made sense to retreat and think about a plan. But why were Xiaozhi, Yunsha, and Yunyin here? Yunsha said that his friend had begged them. They had no choice but to come to his aid. Xiaozhi said that he hadn't really begged them. It was just that there were fewer monsters now, and they had enough strength to escape. Yunsha thanked the girls and his friend. Yunsha noted that the boss was still dangerous. They were ready to cover the young man's retreat. The protagonist, waving his sword, said that there was no need. With their help, he could no longer hold back. Our hero finally reached level 30. Now his ATK was high enough. Yunsha was able to equip himself and don the armor of a fallen knight. It was a drop from the dungeon lord of the Ding family. Yunsha asked if the young man was going to attack that crystal. It was out of reach. It was too high. Yunche thought that he finally had what he wanted so badly. Gravitational pull. This skill helps pull the target towards the user. Gravity push pulls the user toward the target. It's a skill that will pull the protagonist toward the target. Yunche said he had everything under control. Gravity push was activated. The young man found himself right next to the crystal. Yunche swung his sword, and the crystal was destroyed. The protagonist defeated the Lord of the Wandering. Xiaozhi said that Yunche was super strong. Yunyin admitted that he had indeed destroyed this monster single-handedly. Yunche noticed that 2 legendary items had fallen out of the monster. Yunsha noted that the monster was now falling and losing its balance. However, Yunche was still there, so caution was necessary. Yunche entered the cave that had formed. Was it really empty here? The young man thought he saw the remains of the Wandering Ones in front of him. It seemed that an even more powerful Lord of the Wandering Ones had once been born here.
That's why this battlefield looks so terrifying.
At the top of the remains of the Wandering Ones, the young man saw the remains of Chao En. He was holding onto a sword stuck in the ground. Yunche couldn't believe his eyes. Was this really Benben in front of him? This sight was not only visible to the protagonist. Yunsha said that it was the traitor Chao En. She had heard that he had been destroyed by the hero right here. However, she did not expect to see this. Yunsha realized that this was the same scene after a battle with countless casualties, but he was completely unlike a statue in a museum. No one was stepping on him. Xiaozhi said that no one might believe him, but his great-grandfather was not a terrible person at all. The young man had read all the historical books about him since childhood, but whenever he came to the details of his life, the descriptions were too vague. However, he did find something. His great-grandfather constantly went to dungeons that were not appropriate for his level. Why would an S-rank professional with a level of 60 plus come to a low-level dungeon? Because this was where the Lord of the Wandering Ones was supposed to be born. He is a potential source of disaster, capable of summoning monsters from all over the dungeon into the outside world. In the past, the government simply did not have enough troops to defend against all the monsters roaming the dungeon. Therefore, they had to rely on a few powerful and responsible professionals who regularly cleared the dungeons of monsters.
Chaoan was just such a person. He came here to prevent disaster.
Chaochi said that everyone probably thought he had made it all up. His family also thought that he was just seeking psychological comfort, so they tried to find convenient information between the lines. Yunchu said that he believed his friend and knew that this was exactly how it was. Chaoan was definitely a good person. Yunchu remembered how Chaoan used to say that he didn't need a master. He considered himself very talented and said that he would soon surpass many others. As a child, Chowan said that he didn't need to be saved. He had to learn to cope on his own. As he grew up, the young man said that he was one of those who worked hard so that he could distinguish himself at the right moment. His friend said that he had nothing to worry about. Nothing could harm him in this dungeon. He did not understand why he should become a sword guard, especially since it was the weakest of the shield bearers. Chowan objected, saying that this was only true in terms of strength and agility, but he had breakthrough power. No one else could compare. The rescue team was puzzled. How could a shield bearer achieve such goals? Chowan understood that leaving the team without permission would result in a 3-month deduction from his salary. He had just worked so hard that he couldn't help but raise his level. Yuncha believed that, if only for Benben's sake, he had to take revenge on the Ding family. Ding Yi received the information and was surprised. Was he really being told the truth? Ding Shu said he wasn't joking.
You can ask the teacher in charge of the dungeon. Yunche is extremely strong.
The young man added that the teachers at the entrance stopped him and did not let him pass, explaining that his level was too low. One of the students noticed that a wandering monster had fallen in the distance. The teacher said that the monster had been destroyed by that guy, hinting at Yunche. It was a rare hidden boss above level 40. Ding Shu heard the students mention Yunche's name, so many people knew about it, and someone among them was truly amazing. Ding Yi ordered his assistants to immediately call the Ding family guards and follow him to the traitor's dungeon. Ding Yi added that it was imperative to capture the representatives of the Chao family. Yunche activated the skill book, Golden Radiant Shield. The young man gave the book to his friend and told him to learn this skill. There are no level restrictions here. Yuncha said that it was a legendary skill. Was the young man just giving it away like that? Yuncha replied that this skill was only suitable for shield bearers, and he wouldn't be able to use it anyway. Surely his great-grandfather Chao Ji often used this skill. Yuncha noted that it was worth mentioning that Yunche already had many excellent skills. The girl added that his skills were sufficient, but she was still far from this guy's level. Take, for example, the sudden appearance skill. You summon the undead. As far as she remembers, all summoned undead are the souls of the dead, and after death, they end up in the mirror world. Yuncha wondered if it was possible to summon Benben in that case. Yunyin said that Yunsha had to leave because she had an appointment. Yunsha admitted that she had stayed here too long, even though the most interesting part was just beginning. What would Yunche do now? And where had he gone for so long? Yunche found himself back in the mirror world. The young man approached Benben and called out to him. He didn't think they would ever meet again. The young man said he regretted not being able to hear the answer. Yunche acknowledged that Benben had become just a spirit, but he didn't want to fight him. Yunche noticed that images appeared around him, like scenes from the future. The protagonist was surprised. Were these really Benben's memories? Yunche decided that it reminded him of something. Ding-kun? He also didn't understand why Benben was going to attack him. The protagonist was forced to dodge his old friend's attacks. The young man thought that only old instincts remained in Benben's body. Yunche decided he needed to leave. However, he couldn't do it. It was impossible to leave the reflected world in this area. Yunche thought that this time, there was no way to avoid a fight. Ding Shu and his uncle approached Chao Zhi. The man asked where Yunche was now. Had he chickened out and run away? Ding Wu said that he would only get half the fun. Chao Zhi was, of course, surprised to see Ding Shu here. The young man asked what they were doing here. Were they also training?
Ding Wu told Chao Zhi not to pretend. Wasn't it him and his friend who broke into and robbed his house?
Chao Zhi replied that he knew nothing, that they had made a mistake, that he had nothing to do with it. Ding Shu said that he had heard everything and couldn't fail to recognize the voice. Ding Yi said that it didn't matter anymore. He had something prepared for these thieves. Chao Zhi was very surprised. Behind Ding Yi stood his relatives, the Chao family, his grandfather, grandmother, second cousin, and aunt. His mother was also there. The grandfather told his grandson to immediately kneel down and apologize to the hero's family. Chao Zhi must immediately ask the young master for forgiveness. Chao Zhi said he did not want to do that. His grandfather asked indignantly if he had forgotten what he had been taught since childhood. What should he do when he saw the Ding family kneel down? Chao Zhi asked his relatives, would his family remain their servants for the rest of their lives? His great-uncle said that they, the descendants of a sinful traitor, were very lucky to be in such a position. His aunt asked if Chao Zhi really wanted to ruin their entire family. The young man should think about his crazy father. Had Chao Zhi forgotten how hard it was for his mother to support the whole family? Chao Zhi told his relatives to open their eyes. His great-grandfather had come to this dungeon to prevent a catastrophe. He had died only because a crowd had pounced on him. Chao Zhi added that he had been gathering information about his great-grandfather for some time, but he lacked convincing evidence. Now it was right before their eyes. His great-grandfather was not the kind of person who would betray his country. The truth was completely different from what had been imposed on them all these years. If they could reveal it, they would clear the name of his great-grandfather and the Chao family. They had no reason to continue living like this. Chao Zhi said that the Ding family had no right to treat them this way. The Chao family should not have to suffer like this. Ding Wu laughed and said that the young man was absolutely right. His great-grandfather had died in a sudden attack. He was definitely not a villain. To be more precise, his work in the underground had made him a fortune. But who cared? He was a traitor, and everyone should hate him. Ding Yi asked if Chao Zhi really wanted to upset his father even more, or cause the whole family to be punished. The descendants of a traitor should be more modest. Ding Wu said that, in fact, all the members of the Chao family knew the truth. Otherwise, How did all those people they reported on die? Ding Yi ordered everyone to kneel immediately. The Chow family obeyed. The young man's mother said she begged him to admit his mistake and stop resisting. It was all useless. With tears in her eyes, the woman said she didn't want to lose her son too. She simply couldn't bear it. Chao Ji remembered how his mother used to tell him as a child not to pay attention to these people because her son was the best. Ding Shu said that the boy was too slow on the uptake and kicked him. He added that he would make him bow down, whether he wanted to or not. Chao Ji blocked the blow without much effort and threw his opponent aside. The young man said he would never bow down to anyone again. Ding Shu was surprised. Would Chao Ju really dare to fight back? Ding Shu added that now his opponent would remember what it was like to be a whipping boy. Chao Ju blocked his opponent's attack and asked his mother, how could this be? Chao Ju punched his opponent in the jaw with all his might and said that it was his family who were the descendants of the hero. Ding Shu held his bruised face with his hand and couldn't understand. How is this possible? When did Chao Ji become so strong? Ding Shu attacked again, saying that Chao Ji had always been a punching bag that he had played with since childhood. Chao Ji blocked the bully's attack again and said that Ding Shu would never treat him that way again. Chao Ji landed another blow and knocked out his opponent. The Four Eyes said that he was no longer the person he used to be. In the reflected world, the fight also continued. Yun Che fought his old friend Ben Ben. Yun Che understood that this was exactly what Ben Ben was like in his prime. The gap between them had become immeasurable. Yun Che thought, if it weren't for his defensive class, and the fact that his opponent was not himself, he would have been defeated instantly. However, all of Ben Ben's fighting techniques had been taught to him by our hero. His weaknesses were firmly etched in Yun Che's memory. Nevertheless, this was a level 60 defense. Even with his upgraded deceptive blade, the protagonist would hardly be able to inflict significant damage. Ben Ben used the legendary skill, Golden Radiant Shield. Yun Che thought that things were looking bad for him. In the real world, Chao Ju continued to beat Ding Shu. Ding Yi was angry at his nephew because he couldn't even defeat this boy. Ding Wu approached Chao Ju and said that his uncle would help his nephew. However, the young man activated the Golden Radiant Shield and told Ding Yi to watch closely.
What kind of heroes are they? The Ding family is just a bunch of cowards who wouldn't dare to fight one-on-one.
The Golden Hero Shield is a legendary skill. Its defensive capabilities do not depend solely on the characteristics of the defender. Provided that the attacks do not exceed twice the upper limit of what can be withstood, the shield is capable of repelling at least 10 attacks. However, this skill requires constant improvement. Even the slightest damage depletes its energy. After that, any 10 attacks can destroy it. Dean E destroyed the shield and asked what good it was.
The man said it would take him a minute to deal with this boy.
Xiaoqi lifted the beaten Ding Shu to his feet and told his opponent that if his great-grandfather were here, he would be on his knees begging for mercy. Chao Zhi pushed the confused Ding Shu forward. Ding Wu said that this young man's great-grandfather was a useless fool who lost his life in a low-level dungeon. Now, it was his great-grandson's turn. A member of the Ding family activated the gravity shock skill. The ground beneath their feet shook and turned into huge boulders. Ding Yi demanded that the young man kneel immediately. Despite his opponent's use of this skill, Chao Zhi began coughing up blood, but he did not obey. Ding Yi approached the young man and said that he was extremely insolent. However, he wondered how he would be able to stand if his legs were cut off. Chao Zhi's mother ran up and asked Ding Yi to spare her son because he had no idea what he was doing. The woman said that she was kneeling before him and was ready to do whatever he asked. Ding Yi warned that if Chao Zhi did not kneel, he would have to deal with his mother. The villain added that there were enough people here to kill. Chao Zhi shouted, demanding that Ding Yi stop immediately. The young man turned and looked at his relatives. They were frightened and indignant. Ding Yi saw someone from the other world. Qiao En appeared before everyone present. But how is that possible? Chao Zhi's mother was surprised. Was it really her grandfather? The Chao family members claimed that their famous relative had been resurrected, but that was impossible. How could someone who had died be brought back to life?
The aunt said that it was not Qiao En, but an undead.
Yuncha said that Ben Ben was so humiliated that he had to escape from hell to teach everyone a lesson. Chao En looked at Ding Yi and his entourage with interest. Ding Yi ordered his men not to delay in attacking this undead creature. The Ding family guards rushed to attack one man, but met with unprecedented resistance. The Chao family, seeing the skill of this warrior, declared that it was indeed Qiao En. Chao Zhi thought that this technique really belonged to his great-grandfather. He was able to repel the attacks of several guards at once. It was simply amazing. Ding Yi asked Yuncha,
was this his doing?
He summoned another undead. Now he knows how to deal with these pathetic creatures. Ding Yu said that they were at most level 33. Even the revived Chao En was just cannon fodder. Ding Yi lunged at Chao En, but the ghost Ben Ben activated the clutch skill and blocked his opponent's attack. Ding Yu said that blocking techniques were useless against pure power and activated the skill Summon and Collision. Ding ran into another Golden Radiant Shield. This was quite unexpected for him. Ding Yi realized that even though Ben Ben was no longer alive, he was still S-class. It could take half a day to deal with even one of his shields. Ding Yi called on his guards to attack simultaneously and exhaust this undead creature. However, the guards had other things to worry about. They had to fight the undead. Ding Yi felt annoyed. His armor was significantly worn out. The representative of the Din family shouted loudly and activated the skill, Burning Fury. He claimed that these undead were just a bunch of summoned creatures. Dean E activated the skill Accumulated Strike and decided to attack the protagonist. He decided that if he destroyed the summoner, all the undead would disappear. Dean E announced that he had first-class artifacts given to him by his grandfather at his disposal. However, Yunche easily dodged his opponent's attack. Ding E couldn't understand how this was possible. At that moment, the skill Tear Apart was activated. Yunche disappeared and reappeared behind his opponent at the same moment. The protagonist plunged his sword into Ding E's back. Ding E sharply increased his speed, and Yunche, unable to hold on, flew to the side. Benben also tried to catch up with Ding E. Xiao En and Yunche attacked their opponent from both sides, not giving him a chance to recover. Ding E only had time to defend himself. At one point, Ding E took damage and his arm was injured. He shouted at the mages to heal him immediately. The Gravity Strike skill was activated again. Ding E shouted at Xiao En to get out of there immediately. Yunche asked himself, could it be that Ding E was afraid of him? Ding E became nervous and shouted at his priest, asking what he was doing at that moment. The priest was currently fighting a level 33 undead creature. The undead won overall, and the guards of the Ding family were destroyed. Yunche asked,
Did Ding E really think that his undead would not become stronger after visiting his home?
Yunche added that now, with the legendary skills dropped by the Dungeon Lord, his undead were far superior to the guard squad. Ding E thought he had no chance and needed to flee immediately. He turned abruptly and tried to escape. However, he couldn't get very far because a huge sword from the representative of the reflected world was stuck in the ground in front of him. Everything around him shook, and the ground beneath his feet turned into huge boulders. Dean E didn't know what to do next. The young man approached his opponent and said that he had the exclusive skill of a swordsman shield bearer, sword shield formation. The young man told the wounded Din E that fighters below the S-class were no match for him. If his opponent didn't believe him, he could try again. Ding Yi raised his hand and shouted for his opponent not to approach him. He had a wasteland bomb, a terrifying and terrible weapon. Ding Yi added that it was an S-class artifact that his great-grandfather had given him. The young man came up close and said that now Dean E could detonate this bomb. Dean E was surprised. Had he grown tired of living? Yunche said that if Ding E destroyed Benben, he could be resurrected. Yunche approached his opponent from behind and said that he wouldn't even be able to touch him with a finger. Yunche struck with his sword, and Ding E lost another arm. The wounded representative of the Ding family was forced to kneel. Yunche approached him, knocked him to the ground, and lowered his battle sword onto him. The protagonist asked his opponent if he was now of any value. Yunche looked at the list of suggested skills and artifacts. He was interested in the health potion. Considering the speed at which the health potion restored health, even if he used it at that moment, it would be a drop in the ocean. Yunche told his undead Ding E that he would have died anyway. After his death, Ding E's soul appeared in the mirror world. Then our hero cleverly lured him into a trap and made him his undead. Yunche realized that the ranks of high-level undead could be replenished by taking lives. The young man decided to keep him for now. He might come in handy later. The old man from the Chow family said that this young man was still so young, but already very strong. Most likely, he was the one who helped Chow Ju. His inner strength had indeed grown considerably. The members of the Chow family asked the elder, what should they do now? The Ding family would definitely seek revenge for the death of their third head. Even though this guy was exceptionally strong, he didn't stand a chance against a hero. Those who had destroyed their relative decades ago had become even stronger. Yunche overheard this conversation and thought that this was indeed the case. If word of what had happened got out, he would have no time left to improve his abilities. He needed to reach a level where he could stand up to Ding Kun as soon as possible. The young man thought that sending the undead to hunt monsters was a good decision. Given the current level and equipment of the undead, they could easily cause a lot of trouble here. However, this dungeon was no longer sufficient to support rapid growth. Therefore, there was more important work for them to do. The question concerned the Dungeon Lord. Unlike hidden bosses such as the Lord of the Wandering Ones, the Dungeon Lord is its very core. The process of forming the sword shield had begun. The young man understood that defeating the Dungeon Lord would complete the conquest of the entire dungeon, after which it would simply disappear. The entrance was guarded by teachers. The Ding family certainly could not bring the Chow family here unnoticed. The Chow family would certainly look suspicious if they left the dungeon alone. Only by conquering the dungeon, and thus causing it to dissipate, would the Chow family be able to escape in the ensuing chaos. This would prevent the Ding family from confirming the death of the third chapter, and also help buy time. In the end, the protagonist defeated the Dungeon Lord, and the dungeon was conquered. The members of the Chow family noticed that the dungeon was beginning to dissipate. Yunche announced that he had destroyed the Lord. Soon, there will be great confusion, so the Ding family will not be able to react quickly to the death of the third chapter. If the Chow family could escape during this chaos, they would be safe for a while. Yunche added that if the Ding family used force, they should just surrender. Incidentally, the protagonist realized that the experience necessary to raise the level of the reflected world could only be obtained by defeating the Dungeon Lord. The previous upgrade of the reflected world gave a big boost. In the personal dungeon of some rich guy, things were also unsettled. The knight wondered, should he take this seriously? Who would dare to infiltrate a private dungeon? Yunche appeared unnoticed in this dungeon. The young man understood that the guards of private dungeons rarely exceed the 15th level. That is, for our hero, They were practically unprotected and posed no particular danger. Yuncha thought that in a little while, he would be able to destroy Ding Kun, but until then, he would have to restrain himself. He had to remain calm. The dungeon lord was destroyed, and the dungeon was conquered. Yuncha tried to avoid mistakes and level up. Another dungeon was conquered after the lord was destroyed. Each time he gained experience, the young man felt more and more confident, and, as a result, acted calmly. Another dungeon was conquered. Yuncha improved and kept an eye on his mental health. To do this, he breathed more deeply. Another dungeon was conquered. The latest news reported on sabotage in the dungeons. Numerous private dungeons had been maliciously infiltrated. The Security Bureau took this very seriously and sent highly qualified specialists to investigate. Upon receiving this information, the Chow family members assumed that this was the work of Yun Che. Suddenly, many hidden underground passages became known, which was certainly related to this situation. Elder Chow reasonably assumed that the young man was doing all this for their sake. Otherwise, they would never have been able to escape. One of the underground passages was located a few days' journey from the Ding estate. It was so well hidden that it took considerable effort to get inside without leaving any traces. The Chow family decided that now they had nothing to worry about. They were finally safe. Perhaps in the future, they would be able to get rid of the Ding family. Suddenly, everything around them shook. A wall collapsed, and a figure appeared from the cloud of dust. He said, "Have they really decided to get rid of the Ding family?" The second head of the Ding family, Ding Hao, and it was indeed him, said, "Did Chow really think that they would be too busy chasing after that boy?" Ding Hao added, even if the Chows had nothing to do with him, but dared to run away, he decided to come and greet them personally. Did the Chow family really underestimate the hero's family so much? The traitors could continue to delude themselves. However, they had already discovered the location of the perpetrator. In the hero's dungeon, the protagonist said that he had come for Ding Kun's soul. The young man thought that all the dungeons he had encountered before did not exceed level 30. It was a complete waste of time to level up. However, high-level dungeons are not much different from this one. They are controlled by the state, guarded by the military, and surrounded by a 2-kilometer restricted area. Yuncha received information that he had reached the edge of the exploration area. Each time in the reflected world, the young man could only advance 200 meters. Therefore, it is almost impossible to sneak into the closed territory unnoticed. He would have to trust this girl. Yunsha expressed her hope that Yunche had not called her to lead him inside. She could not do that. Yunsha added that even she needed a pass to get inside. Yunche handed the girl a temporary pass. Yunsha said that the young man had prepared well. He needed a guide to get through, without arousing suspicion and undergoing checks. In that case, Yunche had to explain why he had first infiltrated the Ding estate and was now trying to sneak into the guarded dungeon. Yunche said that Yunsha had definitely seen Chao En's body in the traitor's dungeon. The young man added that Chao Yun was not the villain he was made out to be. This means that the story of the rebellion is not so clear-cut. He wants to help his friend and clear the name of the Chao family by challenging this hero. Yunsha said she doubts the young man's intentions. He is risking everything for Chao Ji, who is not even related to him, and is going to fight the hero. On top of that, he infiltrated the Ding family estate before they even visited the traitor's dungeon. Was Yuncha saying that he had foreseen this and stolen the pass in advance? In addition, the third chapter specifically came to the traitor's dungeon because of Yunche and Chao Ji. However, no one has seen Yunche since then. The girl concluded that it was not the Chao family's doing. Yunsha speculated that Yunche personally hated the hero. Yunsha asked if the current Yunche was somehow connected to the traitor Yunche. Yunsha said that the girl also had the surname Yun. Perhaps she was also a relative of the traitor. Yunsha lowered her eyes and said that she would never do such a thing, although in reality, she had a different surname. Yunsha said that she changed her surname so as not to attract unnecessary attention. The young man asked how she knew that he was really Yun. Yunsha asked if the young man was afraid that she would betray him. After all, he didn't look like someone who was asking for help. Yunsha added that she could report him directly to the military, and then the young man would be in big trouble. Yunsha said that Yunsha definitely wouldn't do that. He had seen her risk her life in the dungeon to protect the students. She would never side with the Ding family. Yunsha handed the girl the diary and advised her to read it. He mentioned that he had stolen the diary from the Ding family estate. These people, relying on their status as descendants of the hero, Ding Kun, had committed countless atrocities, bullying men and oppressing women. Yunsha asked, "Is that all? And such trifles are completely irrelevant?"
The girl said she couldn't believe it. She considered the young man to be a sensible person. However, it is very naive to entrust your life to someone who has never faced betrayal.
Yunsha asked what difference it made, whether he had been betrayed or not. It did not mean that he would stop trusting people. Yunsha said that Yunsha was a good person by nature. Yunsha said that if the young man trusted her, he should follow her now. Perhaps she would change her mind and hand him over to the authorities. Yunsha couldn't believe it. Was there really someone else who could trust her and consider her a good person? The girl approached the estate and headed straight for the guards. The captain of the guards greeted Ms. Yunsha and said that the hero had been waiting for her for a long time. They had been instructed to let her through immediately. The captain asked why Yunsha had not come with Mr. Ding. He had literally just gone into the dungeon. The captain of the guards asked if the girl was accompanied by a man in a hood. He did not suspect her of anything, but the lord had warned of the theft of several temporary passes, so caution was necessary. Yunsha said that the captain probably did suspect her. Otherwise, Why would he have questioned her so harshly? The captain replied that he was wrong. The man added that he was simply following the instructions of the security bureau. They had been informed that the criminal who had recently raided many dungeons was now targeting the hero's dungeon. The captain said that they were doing this for safety reasons, to prevent the escort from being replaced or something similar from happening. The girl approached the young man accompanying her and said that they would check it now. Did anyone really think that she would not recognize her own bodyguard? Yunsha added that she could have been replaced too. Wouldn't the captain like to check? The captain replied that if Lady Yunsha was so sure, there could be no mistake. The passage was opened, and the young people proceeded inside the estate. As they entered the dungeon, Yunchi thought that this girl was much more influential than he had imagined. Yunsha said that this time she would trust the young man and not interfere in his affairs. However, that was all. She could not help him any further. Yuncha thanked the girl and told her to take the undead Ding Yi with her. That way, no one would suspect her of anything he intended to do next. Yuncha suggested that the young man still had some conscience left. Yuncha entered the mirror world again. The young man decided that he would finally be able to unlock the full potential of the third level of the mirror world. The dungeon revealed its secret. On the third level, the mirror world creates replicas of real monsters from the dungeon. Now, he could freely farm right here without fear of being discovered. Yuncha left the mirror world. Even after returning to reality, the undead continued to bring him experience. They had indeed built a city in the hidden dungeon. Yunche decided to take a closer look. According to the family diary, Ding Kun lived here. However, the young man knew nothing about him. All that was known was that Ding Kun had reached S-class 10 years ago and had never openly demonstrated his power since then. If Yunche had more information, his chances of winning would be higher. In his previous life, he kept records of everyone who reached S-class, but he knew nothing about Ding Kun. Yuncha asked Ben Ben if he knew anything about Ding Kun. There was no answer. Yuncha thought that with the transition of the reflected world to the third level, the intelligence of the undead had increased significantly. Ben Ben had made the most progress, although he still hadn't reached the level where he could communicate normally. Yuncha assumed that with further development of his consciousness skill, he would return to full communication. Ding Dan told his father that the third was his favorite, and he couldn't just stand aside. Ding Dan added that he was still considered missing. He stood before the hero Ding Kun, who was seated on the throne. Ding Dan said that if this guy was able to silently kidnap the third chapter, then he had reached S-class, and his father had to intervene. Ding Kun approached his son and punched him through the body. He said that Ding Dan couldn't keep track of his own son, but dared to lecture him. Ding Kun added that Ding Dan had finally reached S-class, but couldn't even withstand a single blow from him. Ding Kun said that he had kept him close, but he turned out to be useless. All he had to do was look after his grandson. The hero added that Dan not only lost a man, but now he would have to clean up after him. Did Dan understand that he had lost his own flesh and blood, and that this would shorten his life by several years? Ding Yan mounted the man like a horse and pulled on the strap around his neck. The sorcerer Nan Shi said that the master's beloved pet had not eaten meat for several days. Why not take advantage of the situation? Yuncha thought that compared to what he had just seen, the Ding family behaved very restrainedly outside the dungeon. Ben Ben was burning with rage at that moment. Yuncha thought that even in this state, Chao Yun was still eager to help those in trouble. Among the children who had ended up in the disaster zone, he and Lan Qian were the kindest and strongest. Yuncha thought that this was why he had decided to take these boys as his disciples. He hoped that when the young men became stronger, they would be able to help others. In the end, he brought all this upon Chao En and left him in such a state. Ben Ben said the name Lan Qian. Yunchi was surprised. Could Ben Ben really speak? Ben Ben said that Lan Qian was Ding Kun. Chao Yun was surprised. Did Yunche deliberately use a similar name to provoke him? He couldn't imagine that he would hear it again after so many years. The young man said he wanted to see who dared to impersonate the master. Ding Yan stood in front of the chained monsters and said that they were good boys. Ding Yan added that he had been very busy lately and that they must be hungry. Ding Yan showed the monsters the tortured people and said that he was already quite tired of them. Ding Yan added that dinner was served. The monsters perked up and pounced on these people. However, Yuncha did not continue to hide in his shelter and jumping out, activated the slicing skill. Wielding his sword, the young man began to cut the monsters into pieces, thereby saving the people. Yuncha was puzzled. Had Lan Qian really become Ding Kun? But how is that possible? Ding was surprised. Who else could it be? The sorcerer Nan Shi said that it was a malefactor, clearly out of his mind. How could he show up in the hero's dungeon? It was like signing his own death warrant. Yuncha remembered that he had personally taught Lan Qian. How could this scoundrel Ding Kun have grown up to be like this? At the time, the teacher told the young people that because of those with abilities, the age of knights was a thing of the past. However, as a descendant of a knight, he wanted to pass on their covenants to the boys. Yuncha believed that under his guidance, these children could become stronger than ordinary fighters. If they wanted to continue their training, they had to follow the rules. First, they had to be humble. There was no fundamental difference between them and the others, so they had to remain polite and respectful to everyone. Yuncha activated the cleave skill again, and the sorcerer's magic shield was destroyed. The sorcerer realized that his opponent had legendary level 30 equipment. However, the protective necklace was destroyed. Ding said that the pathetic skull dared to challenge Eagle, adding that he was untouchable. His opponent would now see the difference in their strength. Yuncha taught his disciples to show mercy. They should be kind to the weak, especially the helpless. Evil and cruelty should always be fought with kindness. Yuncha pointed to the man and said that these were the very slave traders from whom he had once rescued the boys. Now they would be able to deliver a truly just sentence. Ding asked if his opponent had destroyed their illusions and was satisfied. If he wanted more, let him continue and enjoy himself. However, this guy's face looked as if he was about to explode with rage. Did he look like that because of those outcasts? Maybe there was a relative of his among them? Dean said that this guy might try to destroy them. He would see how he felt when he realized that he had swung his sword at his enemies, but destroyed his own people. Yuncha saw both the reflected world and the real world at the same time. But how is that possible? Yuncha attacked correctly. Dean was surprised at how his opponent could tell which ones were real. Yuncha taught his students to be brave, fearless, and decisive. There was no place for cowards in the dungeons. They had to fight for justice. During another dungeon raid, the boys told their teacher that they were very scared and almost died. Yuncha said that they were safe because he was watching them and controlling the situation the whole time. Ding thought this guy was strong and added that the sorcerer should cover him and not waste his energy on illusions. They needed to buy time so he could escape. Ding Yan said that if anything happened to him, this scoundrel's grandfather would definitely kill him. The sorcerer activated his skills: spell casting, summoning the swamps, and paralyzing dust. It was very difficult to cast spells without illusions. The sorcerer looked around and couldn't figure out where his opponent had gone. Yuncha suddenly appeared behind the sorcerer and swung his arm to strike. The sorcerer was deactivated and begged for mercy because he was not from the Ding family. He was just hired. If the young man had a plan, he could easily catch Ding Yan. Yuncha destroyed the sorcerer. Earlier, he told his students that they must be prepared to make sacrifices. Ben grabbed Ding Yan by the collar and dragged him along the ground. Ding Yan claimed that he was the great-grandson of a hero. He could not be touched, otherwise his opponent would die in agony. Yuncha summoned the undead created from the destroyed sorcerer. Ding Yan was frightened. What had they done to his sorcerer? Yuncha told his disciples that they must be honest. Young people should also not forget about justice. The disciples would have to constantly prove their valor. Their souls would occupy an important place in their lives. Yuncha walked through the city, saw the horror that was happening, and said that Lan Qian had not simply forgotten everything he had been taught. Lan Qian had betrayed them with Ben. Lan Qian allowed his descendants to commit such evil deeds. Why did this happen? Ding Kun shouted that he was living well in his dungeon. His voice was accompanied by a series of explosions. After these explosions, the protagonist was injured, but continued to ask, "Why did Lan Qian do this?" Ding Kun, formerly Lan Qian, appeared in the ruined city. He was an S-class berserker. Yuncha tried to attack him, using the reflection skill. The protagonist asked again, why did Lan Qian betray him? Ding Kun was surprised. Had Yuncha really pierced his armor? His speed and ATK were extraordinary. Yuncha asked, was this really his disciple, Lan Qian? Why did he betray them? Ding Kun asked, was he being questioned about betrayal now? This guy calls himself Yuncha and knows his former name. Could it be that the old man sent him? Why is this young man pretending to be his teacher? What kind of crazy joke is this? Yuncha asked again, why did Lan Qian betray him? Ding Kun replied that he was just a tool, so he had nothing to say. Yuncha asked, what about him then? At that moment, Chaoan approached Lan Qian, shouting his name loudly. Ding Kun couldn't believe his eyes. Could Ben have survived? But how was that possible? Ding Kun realized that he was facing an undead creature and said that it could indeed be considered a kind of resurrection. However, his consciousness was too weak. The hero's descendants appeared and told Ding Kun to leave these petty thieves to them. Yuncha summoned the undead and told them to deal with these rivals. Ding Kun recognized his third grandson among the undead. Could he really be dead? Ding Kun approached Yuncha and said that this guy really interested him. After all, this was not just summoning undead, but a true resurrection. Ding Kun said that this guy had to prove that he was really his master, his dear teacher. Ding Kun asked what the teacher wanted to know, and that he was ready to tell him everything. Yuncha said that even when he was first in the cage, Lan Qian tried to help others. How could he have changed so much? Ding Kun replied that the reason for everything was his dear teacher. Yuncha was indignant. What nonsense was Lan Qian talking about? Had he forgotten who had freed him from slavery and made him so strong? Wasn't that what he had taught the young man? Why had everything turned out this way? Ding Kun asked why the teacher had waited so long before coming for him. Why did he let him suffer before saving him? Why not just make him a disciple? Just a disciple of a knight's son, when anyone could live in comfort? Why did everyone treat his disciples with such respect? What gave that useless Ben the right to enjoy all this when he hadn't really suffered enough? Ding Kun asked why he was better than him in everything. Ding Kun shouted loudly, why did he become the teacher's favorite? Ding Kun asked why Yuncha had forced him to switch classes to berserk. Was it because he was a coward? Shouldn't he have chosen a more defensive branch? such as swordsman? Yunche was surprised. Had he ever chosen a favorite? Lan Qian always acted as if he wanted to become stronger and braver. Ding Kun said that it was all because the teacher loved people like Benben more, so he tried very hard to be braver. But did the teacher treat him better? The teacher despised him from the bottom of his heart because of his origins. There was no point in pretending anymore. Ding Kun said that pity and humility. He no longer wanted all these chivalrous feelings. How could that improve his life? Aren't relationships between people based on power and status? The teacher was able to brainwash the foolish Benben. He wasted his upgrades trying to save others. Ding Kun asked what betrayal he was talking about. If the teacher chose Benben, what does that mean? That he could have chosen someone else? His good friend Luo Wei gave him more status and power. Yunche can see what his descendants have become, and see what has become of Benben's legacy. Now they can only be servants of the Ding family. Yunche can see how Luo Wei has risen.
What can the teacher say now? Which of them made the right choice?
Yunche called his former disciple an ungrateful, heartless scoundrel. Yunche said that Ding Kun really couldn't compare to Benben. He wasn't worth a finger on his hand. The conditions for the absence of armor were met. The berserker body was activated. Ding Kun said that Yunche had finally admitted it. The rampage skill was activated. The berserker attacked his former teacher and said that Benben was his favorite after all. What a hypocrite Yunche was. Yunche thought that he could only hide in the reflected world. The berserker asked, was the teacher using mirrors to maneuver? Berserk's exclusive skill, Blood Rain, was activated. What would his opponent do without mirrors? Ding Kun said that Yunche should come out against him and fight face to face. After all, a knight must be brave. Ding Kun said that was what he thought. All the teacher could do was preach while hiding in a secluded corner. A spoiled aristocrat, he understood nothing. How can a teacher talk about suffering if he has never experienced it? His sermons were nothing but comforting fantasies. Berserk activated the skill, Bloodthirsty Blade. Did the teacher really believe that his friends and students would always be on his side? That was very naive. Yunche can now see his pitiful state. Without mirrors, he is nothing. Even if he doesn't attack now, Yunche won't be able to withstand the constant damage from Blood Rain. Ding Kun blocked his opponent's attack and said that his teacher wasn't always so weak.
Now the teacher's paying for his naivety. He should not be grateful. Only betrayal can truly temper him.
Berserk noted that falling from heaven to earth must be very unpleasant. How does it feel to admit that Luo Wei has become the supreme ruler, revered by all? Yunche turned out to be a traitor, despised and exiled. Doesn't the teacher feel even a little envious? After numerous attacks from his opponent, Yunche could barely stand and felt broken. Berserk said that his former teacher was on the verge of collapse. Whether the teacher would survive or not depended solely on him. Ding Kun said that if the teacher admitted his mistakes and knelt down begging for mercy, he might spare his life and keep him here as a pet. But there was one condition. He would have to reveal the secret of resurrection. Yunche gathered his last strength, activated the Shadow and Ghost Blades, and said that he had once saved the boy from a slave cage. His mistake was to trust a traitor. It was a mistake to believe that you can mold a person only by your example. Yunche found himself in the reflected world. He said that his mistake was believing that good people would never become bad. The skill Accelerating Radiance was activated. He was guilty of zealously following the virtues of knighthood. Yunche emerged from the mirror world and said that people like Ding Kun must be eliminated by any means necessary. Berserk laughed and said that he used to think it was a skill of wielding two blades, but it turned out to be blind slaughter. Using unfamiliar fighting techniques in real combat is tantamount to self-destruction. Yunche appeared behind his opponent and attacked him. Blood spurted from Ding Kun's mouth. He didn't understand how this was possible because he had destroyed all the mirrors. Yunche understood that any reflective surface could be a mirror. For example, a reflection could be in a pool of blood. Berserk activated the Blood Chi concentration skill and said that his opponent had slipped through his fingers. However, after this attack, their running around would end. Now, there was nothing to reflect. The next moment, Berserk was attacked again. His body was pierced through with a blade. Ding Kun looked back and asked in surprise when Benben had managed to appear here. When had these two managed to surround him? Yunche said that, with such an opponent, it was useless to talk about chivalry. Ding Kun said that the enemy he defeated 60 years ago was now no match for him. The deeper his wounds, the stronger he became. Yunche said that he knew all of his opponent's vulnerabilities. The berserker had two weaknesses. The first is his defense. To become a berserker, he invested all his points in ATK and speed. As a result, he has no reserves left for defense. In addition, many skills further weaken it. Even his life can be severely affected. The skill Whirlwind Strike was activated. Ding Kun said that the undead are just dead warriors. It is enough to simply kill them. Yunche said that the second weakness was the limited attack radius. Apart from Whirlwind Strike, which was available before the class change, the berserker's arsenal mainly consisted of linear attacks. Yunche noted that his generation allowed him to keep many undead on the field at once. The opponent would not be able to easily get rid of them all. Yunche added that the berserker's greatest weakness was that he had no one to rely on. Back when Lan Qian and Chao En acted as one, they covered each other's weaknesses. But now, the shield that once protected him has become a sword that wounds him. Considering that Ding Kun came to power through betrayal, he hardly had any close friends left. Was he satisfied with that? Ding Kun asked what friendship he was talking about. What had his teacher's friendship led to? He himself had been in power for 60 years, and needed neither comrades nor friends. Berserk called on his sons and grandsons to meet his enemy face to face. The call was accepted. Lin Kun repeated that he did not need allies. His grandsons and sons would fight for him. The sons stopped in fear when they saw that their father had been wounded. Was he really losing? Ding Kun shouted again for his descendants to heal him immediately and attack his opponent. His sons said fearfully that even their father could not defeat this man. How could they possibly do it? Ding Kun cursed loudly and said that he would handle it himself. At the same time, he grabbed one of his sons by the throat. Ding Kun shouted that everything his descendants had, he had personally given them. Didn't his son understand why he had been born? It was only for his health and longevity. How dare he refuse? Ding Kun told his other sons to stop their rival immediately, or else they would face his punishment. Yunche called on many undead creatures for help, and said that no matter how young Ding Kun looked, inside him was an aged soul. He could come and enjoy his last evening with his family. Ding Kun realized that all his children had already been turned into undead creatures. Yunche rushed after his rival, and said that Ding Kun would not be able to escape him. The protagonist caught up with the traitor, and inflicted significant injuries on him. Yunche said that Lan Qian could have had children and grandchildren, but now, only their hatred remained. His decisions had led him to a dead end. More than 60 years ago, a teacher once approached his students. The teacher said that the young people had successfully completed their retraining and achieved S-class status. As their teacher, he was very pleased. He sent the best materials he had accumulated over the years to the divine blacksmith, who forged weapons of the highest quality. These weapons are the highest level currently available. Lin Qian got a sword similar in style to the one he had before, so he will master the new one in no time. Ben Benyu got a combination of an axe and a shield, perfect for his new class. Given his combat talent, the young man will quickly learn how to use these weapons. Benben asked what Lan Qian was staring at so intently. Lan Qian said that the master had never upgraded his sword. Wasn't it too old? Yunche replied that he would never replace this sword. This sword was called Wandering Cloud. It was the most perfect weapon forged in an ancient smithy. He gave everything he had to create it. He spent years collecting materials and artifacts from the best dungeons. He even infiltrated a secret S-class dungeon. At that time, it was only the beginning of the sword. Like any unique piece of equipment of exceptional quality, the sword has its own special way of being activated. Like floating clouds, it transforms endlessly and is capable of taking any desired form. Thus, its true form is only revealed in the process of interacting with the user. Having gone through countless battles with its owner, the sword has long since adapted to his will. The sword adapts to every change in his abilities. Yunche handed the sword to his disciple and asked if he wanted to try it. Lan Qian was, of course, delighted. Later, the traitor said that everything should be done to make it look as if Yunche had staged a rebellion. Then Lan Qian rejoiced. Finally, this sword belonged to him. It was the most powerful weapon. The sword changed shape. Yunche said that when he found himself at the very edge of the underground realm and realized how difficult the road ahead would be, he did not hesitate for a moment. No difficulties could stop him. All this was for the sake of living a peaceful, quiet life. But what happened to the sword? Because of the greed of the former disciple. The wounded Ding Kun told the master that he was wrong. Yunche said that he was indifferent to the title of hero. Yunche noticed that Ding Kun was holding nothing more than an ordinary sword. The Wandering Cloud sword had taken the form of a giant scythe. Yunche asked, was this why the disciple had betrayed him and Benben? Yunche told Ding Kun to accept the position he had put himself in and knock the scoundrel's head off. Yunche said that now he would know everything Ding Kun knew. Benben said that he was bait for Luo Wei. Yunche said that the road to revenge had only just begun. For the sake of this revenge, the young man was willing to become stronger. Due to the restrictions imposed on the dungeon, ordinary people can now reach a maximum of level 30 in their entire lives. Even if a person has exceptional talent, by entering the service of an official institution and gradually climbing the career ladder, they can reach a maximum of level 60. This is because the 60th level is a difficult barrier to overcome. Leveling up is necessary. By fulfilling certain requirements, users can develop their class, gaining access to higher level equipment, improved attributes, and exclusive skills. Only those who have completed a class change can exceed the 60 level. And to change classes, you need to obtain a class change certificate. These certificates are extremely rare. Even in the old days, when dungeons were open to everyone, only 1 in 1,000 possessed one. Now, the possession of certificates is strictly controlled by the authorities. In the entire family of heroes, only Lan Qian has one. None of his descendants have changed classes. The gap between those who have changed classes and those who have not is like the difference between heaven and earth. Lan Qian advanced from warrior to berserker, acquiring exclusive skills. His strength increased several times over. If it weren't for the mirror world, the protagonist wouldn't stand a chance against him. If Yunche had changed classes while possessing the reflected world, how much stronger could he have become? The prerequisites for changing classes had been met. The classes available to bards had been determined long ago, and only a few managed to advance successfully. It was also the only class with offensive skills. Yunche chose the class Dancer Fighter. He was curious to see what drastic changes the class change would bring. There are 8 basic classes, which branch out into dozens of advanced subclasses. Each subclass has its own development path. However, there are exceptions. There are quite a few hidden subclasses. They have complex requirements, but they give great power when leveled up. For example, the dancer fighter. Contrary to logic, it requires more than 55 points of agility and more than 65 points of mental strength. This completely breaks the usual stat distribution patterns. In addition, an ultra-rare item, the Crystal of Bloody Carnage, is required to obtain the class. This blood crystal is only filled with energy after a huge amount of destruction. For a bard who does not have their own attacking skills, it is almost impossible to obtain it. Therefore, only a few have ever undergone a class change. But now, after the reinforcement of the reflected world, the requirements for changing to the Dancer Fighter class have increased significantly. Yuncha wondered, is there even a reflection base? The requirements must be at least comparable to the Crystal of Bloody Carnage. The Seedbed of Life is a treasure that allows you to endlessly produce fully restorative potions. Each such seedbed is something that professionals are willing to fight to the death for. Having it means allowing the team to do without a healer altogether. Then this class must be absurdly powerful after transformation. Yunche moved back to the reflected world. The young man thought that raising the level of the reflected world would gradually open and improve it. An orc leader, the Dungeon Lord, appeared before the protagonist. It was a replica. After reaching the third level in the mirror world, not only ordinary monsters appeared, there were already replicas of the Dungeon Lords. Yuncha noted that there were significantly more souls than at the very beginning. Moreover, even if the requirements for changing classes could be reflected, other levels of this power could certainly be explored much more deeply. Yuncha left the mirrored world and immediately found himself in front of a huge monster. Right now, our hero's priority was to change classes, because that was the fastest way to increase his power. The Lord was defeated, and the dungeon disappeared. People were puzzled. How could the hero's dungeon suddenly disappear? What was the hero up to? Television reported that an entire clan of heroes had been brutally destroyed. No suspects had been identified. Additional information was needed. People were puzzled. Had the hero really been destroyed? He was a hero and an absolute legend. The authorities showed the only photo that had been taken. This man is wanted. Every effort must be made to apprehend him. Supreme Ruler Luo Wei acknowledged that the boy Lanqian had already perished. In the former hero's sanctuary, an S-class swordsman sat on his throne. His Majesty was informed that none of the warriors guarding Ding Kun knew what had happened. The swordsman said he had ordered his men to check the entry and exit logs. They also received information from the Public Security Bureau. Currently, the suspects are Yun Sha and Yun Che. The swordsman said that this name brought back memories. He would deal with it personally. Everyone in the neighborhood was discussing the incidents that had occurred in the hero's dungeon. They had been talking about it incessantly for several days, but who dared to raise a hand against the hero? Yun Sha was puzzled. What was the army doing in this area? The girl couldn't believe it. Did this guy, Yun Che, just take it upon himself to destroy Ding Kun? She had helped him enter the hero's dungeon. Should she report this? After this, she doubted that they would ever meet again. At that moment, Yun Che was walking towards the girl. This encounter was unexpected. Chowan said that it was a hotbed of life. He had never heard of such a thing. A seedbed of life is necessary for class change and is extremely rare. It is only available to very high-ranking individuals. It is someone who occupies a sufficiently high position. The only person who came to the young man's mind was Yun Sha, who was clearly of very noble blood. Yun Che asked if Chao En knew who Yun Sha was. It seemed that he really wanted to meet her. Ben Ben said that Yun Sha was Luo Sha, Luo Wei's granddaughter. The protagonist really did not expect such a turn of events. The students rushed after the young man and shouted that Yun Che had come to school. The students asked if Yun Che was so exhausted after the battle with the Lord of the Wandering that he had to rest for several days. If it weren't for this young man, they would not have survived at all. Yun Che was incredibly strong. The students said that they had despaired, but Yun Che appeared and saved them all. They were all waiting for him at school to thank him. Finally, the young man arrived. The school administration also wanted to reward him. The students said that if the young man returned, the Ding family would definitely come looking for him. How did it happen that the third head of the Ding family disappeared just when the commotion in the dungeon began? Now, the Ding family is rushing around the city, trying to find any clues. One of the students added that Yun Che is very strong, but what if they decide to interrogate him harshly? Although, most likely, there is no cause for concern. After all, it is already clear to everyone who is to blame, the very dungeon destroyer that was written about in the newspapers. There are rumors that even the hero has died, but no one would think that Yun Che could have destroyed the hero. The young man understood that the Ding family knew from his voice that he was the robber. Without convincing evidence, they remain the only ones who suspect him. The student said that the dungeon destroyer was now being hunted by the security service and would surely be caught soon. Such rumors were circulating. Yun Che thought, as long as that security service doesn't come after him. Law enforcement here was simply insane. There were patrols on every street, each of them very strong. Added to this were constant reports via devices that people called mobile phones. Yun Che thought that if it weren't for his undead ability to cover his tracks, he wouldn't have made it here at all. Among the students, it was easiest to pass himself off as one of them and not arouse suspicion. The main thing was that here, he would be able to study this world. The students said that if it weren't for the dungeon destroyer, no one would have suspected them or Yun Che. The students didn't understand how he could have done such a thing. No matter how evil he was, He shouldn't have raised his hand against a hero. Yuncha thought that these people had known only the good hero, created by Luo Wei's propaganda since childhood. Even if the villain he destroyed was evil, their views would not change so easily.
Someone in the crowd said that the hero was not really as he was described in the books.
One of the students added that his distant uncle had mentioned some unknown facts, but no one wanted to listen to the student. After all, the hero was a hero, and that said it all. Someone had a video secretly filmed at the moment when the hero's dungeon was destroyed. The people in it looked terrible. It seemed that they had been kept as slaves and tortured by members of the Ding family for years. It was very cruel. Yuncha thought, could something really start to change? The students were surprised. Where could such a video have come from? Everything there was guarded by troops. Leaks seemed impossible. Obviously, it was fake, an attempt to discredit the hero. No one wanted to believe it. Yunsha said it was all real. She had recently been personally invited to the hero's dungeon. What was in the video was just the tip of the iceberg. The disciples were surprised. Could even Yunsha say that? Could it be true? Could it all have really happened? Yunsha grabbed Yuncha's hand and told him to follow her immediately. Once they were alone, the girl asked why Yunche had returned at all. Wasn't he afraid that the security service would come after him? Or did he think they were the lesser of two evils? Yunche had destroyed the hero, and she wanted to know if he realized the consequences.
Yunsha asked if Yuncha was really not afraid that she might betray him. The young man reminded her that he believed she was a good person at heart.
Yunsha said that, given the atrocities committed by their heroic family, it was good that they had died. The girl added that at least Yunche now owed her another favor. Yuncha reminded her that he would not forget her help and called the girl by her name, Luo Sha. The young man was tormented by the question, why, as Luo Wei's granddaughter, did she help him get into the hero's dungeon? Could it be that she couldn't stand what her family was doing? What was her relationship with Luo Wei? The protagonist decided that he might be able to use Luo Sha to achieve his goal. Yuncha decided to focus on his immediate goal for now. He asked her if she knew about the seedbed of life.
Luo Sha replied that she did. It is the thing that produces the essence of life.
Yuncha stood in front of the director's office. This old eccentric must have at least one seedling of life. The protagonist entered the mirror world. The old man had a seedling of the world tree in his collection, which he valued greatly. The young man knew that the old man had acquired almost all the nurseries of life he could get his hands on. It was time to water his precious seedling. Yunche saw various replicas of the seedling of life around him. However, they were all sealed by the director's technique. The young man intended to obtain a replica directly through the reflected world, but did not expect the formations to work in it. Although the seals were familiar to the hero from his previous life, this particular formation was clearly different from what he knew before. It included many elements characteristic of this era. Yunche decided that with his current power, it was impossible to destroy the magical protection. Even if his attack allowed it, the rough destruction would destroy the objects inside. Yunche decided to leave for now and exited the room. Director Bo Ling, an 89th level cultivator, remained seated in his office. Yunche thought that this man's strength far exceeded that of Lan Qian. Without changing his class, it would be difficult to oppose him. There were only two ways to obtain the seedbed of life. Wait for him to open access himself and then capture it through the reflected world, or study the knowledge of this era, understand the formation, and find a way to destroy it. Yunche went to the school library and selected the literature he needed for his studies. He was interested in the book Mechanics in Everyday Life. Yunche thought that after his rebirth, he had acted too hastily. The world had changed so much that without understanding it, he would not even be able to get an audience with Luo Wei. He dismantled some mechanisms copied from other places, but did not understand their true meaning, even though others used them freely. It was rumored that Luo Wei was the driving force behind this progress, but where did he get these devices and concepts? Studying the literature, the young man understood how magic cores were used. But what was the basic principle? The items from the dungeons were not a problem, but combining them with mechanics left too many questions unanswered. Although answers were found to some questions, they gave rise to even more questions. In addition, much of the knowledge remained unclear and had many cross-references to other texts. Yunche decided that most books were silent on many things. It seemed that important information was simply not allowed to be printed. This meant that the answers could be hidden in highly specialized, forgotten, or rare copies. The problem was that among them were tons of useless garbage. The search for answers could take an infinite amount of time. Suddenly, the young man saw Yun Yin in the library. The girl was sitting with a book in her hands. Yun Yin was engrossed in reading and did not notice him right away. Yunche thought that she always went with Yunsha, but what was she doing here alone? He said he had just come for a book. The young man added that he wasn't sure which book he needed yet. Yun Yin threw him a book and said that this one would suit him. Yunche thanked the girl and left the library. Yun Yin continued reading. After a while, he returned and said that he had finished reading and asked if there was anything about mobile communications. The next day, the girl again offered him the necessary literature. Yunche handed her a box and said he had found something delicious. Would she like to try it? Yun Yin refused. Yunche said he would leave the box there. The young man felt a strange attraction to the girl, even though she was cold towards him. Yun Yin became interested in the contents of the box and took it. The next day, the young man expressed his hope to find literature on magical engines. Yun Yin said that he should look for it on other shelves. Yoon-chae assumed that the girl only visited the library for quiet reading when Yoon-cha was resting. Yoon-cha thought that when he got to know her better, he would be able to get information from her about Luo Wei and Luo Sha. The young man showed her the open book and asked what it could mean. Yoon-yin replied that she didn't know. Yoon-cha asked if she was familiar with formation communication systems. The girl suggested that it was a mechanical interface connecting different formations. The young man asked her to find books on the subject. Yoon-yin asked why he didn't ask that guy. She was referring to his little assistant, the descendant of a traitor. Where was he now? Yoon-chae replied that he would be back soon. The inner piece of the Ding family. Ding Hao looked at the photo sent by mail.
The man said he was being threatened using Ding Shu. What did the villain want by just sending one photo? There was no other news. His brother asked if it was sent by that guy, Yoon-chae.
Dean Hao said that he had met Qiao Zhu before, so perhaps it was because of Qiao's family members. Could Yoon-chae really destroy a hero? Did he have the strength to destroy his grandfather? Why hadn't the guard caught him yet? Were they being ignored? A knight entered the room and informed the leader that Qiao Zhu had returned to school. Qiao Zhu staged a solo picket and held a banner that read, "Clear my name." The students recognized him as Qiao Zhi, but what was he up to? Did he want to stir up trouble now that the hero was dead? After all, he was still a traitor. Yoon-cha thought that the truth had been hidden for many years. The hero had been unjustly accused and labeled a traitor. However, some people stubbornly sought the truth. Qiao Zhi claimed that there was now enough evidence to prove that his great-grandfather was not a traitor. He was a hero. Yoon-cha thought that perhaps the world would change thanks to Qiao Zhi's perseverance.